Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish, our last meeting of the year, Tuesday, December 22nd. Hatsqualawan, Queeslukmut, Squamish, Oemeo. We are all fortunate to be living and working on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Motion to just want to add a motion to close at the end of the meeting. So with that amendment, approve the agenda. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Ministerial Order M192. Today, the district is ensuring the openness, transparency, accessibility, and accountability at this meeting by the following means. This meeting is being live streamed, and a video of this meeting will be available on the district's website for viewing on an on-demand basis. There's someone that would like to move that. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Race. Any opposed? Motion carries. We are still meeting electronically, and so council members meeting electronically are required to follow the following. This is getting worse, not better. When council members disconnect or reconnect, to let the chair know so this can be recorded in the minutes. Council members are to identify themselves if they wish to speak by raising their hand if they're on video, or just saying chair if they're connected by audio only. With respect to a vote, council members are only required to state a nay vote. No statement is required if you are in favor. Council members, staff shall keep their telephone or computer on mute until it's their turn to speak. We do expect council members to be actively involved in and participate in the meeting. And if you're having any technical difficulties, council, please text Ms. Pollock. She is here today, and if the issues are on our side, we'll recess for up to 10 minutes to get everyone reconnected again. So with that, the first item on our agenda is the special projects and capital budget discussion. Councillor Race.
Thank you. Is staff going to send us a link for the closed?
We will get that to you.
Thank you.
Okay, on to our special projects and capital budget. Our finance team is with us today, and a whole bunch of other folks in case we have any questions. So this is generally the part of the budget where council has questions. So Mr. Russell, I see you. Am I turning over to you or to Ms. Boxrud? Who am I turning it over to? Finance?
Good morning, Council. We'll turn it over to Roland Russell, the Senior Analyst for Finance and Reporting.
Go ahead, Mr. Russell.
Good morning. I am going to start a slideshow, and I will share it with you. Give me a moment here to make sure I have clicked on the correct buttons. Okay, just a moment and I will share my screen. Are you able to see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I will commence. Good morning, Mayor, members of Council. I would like to say we are with you today to look at our project budget, among other things. So, as an introduction, today we are requesting Council provide resolutions to administration to include the following items in the 2021 through 2025 financial plan. Item 1, approve the 2021 BC COVID Restart Grant spending. Approve the 2021 through 25 special operating projects. Approve the capital plan projects. approve the service level changes, and direct administration to prepare public engagement information on this basis. We would like to note that, as always, we are available for community feedback, and there's a number of ways that the community can reach us for feedback, and they are listed here. We would like to quickly go over the schedule for the budget, the remaining budget schedule. Today, we are going to look at the 4 items I mentioned previously: restart grant, special operating projects, capital projects, and the summary. We anticipate that we will be holding a public event on the date of January 28th, and pending the result of that, we anticipate that we will be bringing the financial plan bylaw to council in mid-February. The final step in the overall budget planning and tax policy grouping, I guess, sorry, I stumbled on my words there, is in April. We will bring the property tax review and the property tax bylaw. So let's get started with today's schedule. We have a number of things to cover. So we want to start with the BC COVID-19 Restart Grant. We've broken the Restart Grant down into 4 different components. The 4 components are listed here. The non-discretionary, these represent expenses, changes in service level that are required to provide existing services. And we brought these forward to council previously, and council agreed that these should be included. And at that point in time, because the BC COVID grant was new, we pointed out that we would had intent to include those as being paid for via the grant rather than through a reserve. The new operating expenses represent new services that will assist the community in transitioning to a stable post-COVID environment. We also have projects that we are planning on funding through the COVID Restart Grant, and those are both operating and capital projects and are listed in the package that you have received. In addition to that, there will be a recovery of funding for expenses in 2020, and lastly, there'll be a few dollars left over. Roughly 10% of the total Restart Grant will be available as a provision to allow us to continue spending into 2021 if that is required. So that's the outline of the COVID restart. And at this point, I'd like to take a slight pause and provide council an opportunity to ask any questions that they may have with respect to the COVID Restart Grant. So I will, I believe, stop sharing my screen at this point and allow for questions. Sorry, here we go. Let's click on the correct button.
Councillor Pettengill?
Thank you. Do we have any indication from the province about, whether they're willing or able to provide more support going forward if it becomes necessary, if COVID drags on longer than some of the I guess hopeful projections?
Through the chair, at this point in time, the provincial government has indicated that they would provide this level of funding to us. We've not received any specific notifications from other levels of government, either provincial or federal, that there would be additional funding specifically related to COVID. What we have seen is that there are a number of other programs that are being rolled out, in this case specifically by the federal government, to provide additional funding in support of COVID. There are some grants, as example, that I believe have been brought to council recently or will be brought to council shortly that reflect that additional funding made available by the federal government to help our economy. So at this point in time, we're not aware of anything that might be forthcoming after we spend this $3.8 million, but both the province and the federal government have put forward a fair bit of money to help the economy get restarted. And I don't know, to be fair, whether we should expect additional funding over and above that. I will pause at this moment and ask Ms. Boxrud if she would like to add any comments to that.
Yeah, thank you, Roland. In addition to that, we have received some assistance for BC Transit as well. So for both 2020 and 2021 and bringing into 2022. So just a further clarification.
Okay, and so I guess then, I guess what I'm trying to get at is you know, our confidence that, you know, we're not running through the money too fast. We're sort of fairly confident that regardless of what direction COVID takes, we're in a good place.
I think that is at the discretion of council. Staff have provided in this budget their recommendations, Councillor Pettengill, and it is for us to determine whether that money is being spent too fast, too slow, or just right. There is some left over as a provision so that we're not spending it all at once. So there is some there to make sure that we have some available in case there's anything that shows up that we didn't anticipate. But the decision will be ours today about how to spend this money based on the recommendations of staff.
Okay, thank you. I'll chew on that for a bit. Thank you.
Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I'm just curious, I have a few different questions. The first, I guess, is it seems like there are a few costs in here that are also reoccurring in our regular budget, like workstation upgrades. We also see that later on in the budget, I think the capital budget. So I'm just curious why we're including that here as well as in the other portion of the budget. The other one would be the ECDEV data collection, which is something that we do on an annual basis.
Through the chair, to answer that question, there are, as we've outlined in the COVID-19 component of your package, there are a number of projects that were originally identified as requirements for 2021 through 2022. And in reviewing the criteria for the grant, it was determined that these projects could be funded by the grant rather than through another source. So what we've done is included the funding for those projects via the grant. We've included them on both pages, so we've created a separate COVID section. We've included the projects on the operating schedule or the capital schedule so that that provides a total picture of all of the operating or capital projects that are being undertaken by the organization. And then we've attempted to identify those separately as those being funded by COVID versus those being funded by taxation or other grants or what other funding sources. So if you see a project in two places, it's not that the project is being double counted, it's simply that the project is being identified as a project within the operating plan. And we've also identified this specifically as an operating project that we believe can and will be funded through the COVID grant. So we've attempted to create a separate package of COVID-related projects and show them in their entirety.
Thank you. I guess my follow-up to that is based off of our previous kind of philosophy around this in terms of trying to level out our taxation over time, knowing that these are costs that we expect to incur on an annual basis. Why would we allocate that cost to a one-time grant if we know we're going to have to tax for it next year?
Through the chair, I think that if we were to dive into the individual projects that have been identified as funded via the COVID grant, we are only identifying a single year of funding for those projects. So as an example, if we were to look at something like workstations, IT workstation upgrade, what we're saying is rather than taxing for that in 2021, we could use the COVID grant to pay for that component of the project this year. So that would allow us the opportunity to use the tax funding to fund another project that we think is important and we would like to proceed with. And we fully recognize that next year we're going to continue on our normal pattern and we would then fund that project from taxes, as an example.
Okay, that gives me something to think about. My other question is around the emergency ops line items in the COVID response. They both in their descriptions speak to the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, which I think we submitted applications to the UBCM funding. So are these presented here as placeholders in case that funding is not approved, or why are they allocated here?
They are allocated there. That's a very good question. Thank you very much, through the chair. In our discussions with our emergency management group, they've included these programs. They've applied for the grants, and we believe that the COVID Restart grant makes specific commentation in its availability that things such as emergency preparedness would be covered by the grant. So what we're hoping is that we would use the COVID money if we don't receive the grant to ensure that we are able to create these enhancements to our emergency management program, regardless of whether we receive the grant that we had applied for. Normally, what would occur is if we don't get the grant, we don't go forward with the project. But in this case, our intent is to go forward with the project regardless. And if we don't get the grant, then we would use COVID funding. And if we do get the grant, then we would not use the COVID funding. And that COVID funding would then be available to be spent, for example, in 2022 on some other project.
Ms. Glende?
Thank you very much. Through the chair, if I can just provide some additional context as well around a specific question as it relates to the workstation. Yes, that is an annual cost that we wouldn't want to, again, have pressure on taxation once COVID can't cover it. The anomaly this year is that the workstation budget took a huge hit when a number of employees went and worked at home. And so the IT pressure to pay for the capital and the systems to allow for that. So this is smoothing that blip that has occurred and will into 2021 as we continue to refresh the workstation program that had a lot of pressure under it in terms of people going and working at home. So that's why this is part of the COVID as well. The economic development project is a one-time project that does qualify under COVID, so we took advantage of being able to fund it through this fund. Hopefully that helps a little bit, provides more context.
Thank you. That's it for now.
Councillor Ray?
Thank you. We had a discussion a few weeks ago when we first learned of the COVID monies about spending them. And my recollection of that was with some of these that are presented in front of us today, these are capital, which I interpret to be kind of one-time projects. And my recollection of the discussion was that we should use the COVID funding where it could be applied as opposed to using our own reserves. To spend the COVID monies first, in other words, there was at that time at least a little bit of uncertainty whether the province might ever ask for it back or something like that. So, I looked at that as saying, okay, we'll spend the COVID money where it applies first, and then we'll go to usual forms of funding for other things. And that takes care of the capital. And as far as the operating items go, the way I looked at this report was that the COVID monies were being spent on one-time operating hits because of COVID, and not something that you consider part of business as usual. I mean, I tend to agree with Councillor Stoner's thought that, you know, if it was business as usual, we shouldn't sort of go and use the COVID monies to defray some of our regular taxation sources, because then it just leaves a bigger climb out of it when we stop getting that funding. But I looked at the ones that were presented in the report as being operating costs, certainly, but sort of one-time operating costs or expenses as a result of COVID, and not part of just our ongoing core infrastructure. So if staff can confirm that I'm correct in that sense, I'm satisfied with it. Thank you.
Were you looking for an answer?
Well, I just the confirmation part, that the way I read with respect to the expenses presented to us in the report related to COVID, that we're spending COVID monies on, that they are in effect one-time COVID related. And so we're talking, for example, about extra janitorial staff and things of that nature, which is an expense item. But presumably, if COVID passed away, we would go back to normal janitorial levels and would not be incurring that expense. But so that's, from my perspective, that's okay. But if we were increasing the janitorial staff generally, regardless of COVID, then I think we'd want to consider whether or not we want to spend COVID monies on that, or whether we just go to regular taxation and build the tax base for that. So I guess what I was asking staff to confirm is that the expenses that are presented for COVID are more or less one-offs related to COVID, and not part of our sort of our normal stuff.
Through the chair, if I could address that question from Councillor Race. And I understand that you're not sharing the screen right now, but within the COVID-19 expenses, what we've identified is $1.3 million of operating expenses. And those expenses are strictly as a result of COVID. So those reflect the expenses that we presented to council previously, that we suggested will be covered through a reserve if the COVID grant were not available, and also additional operating expenses related to IT support, additional capital support, additional support for council meetings and for janitorial, etc. Those costs are clearly a one-off. These are costs that are required to allow us to manage COVID requirements over the next year. If at the end of this grant, those costs would go away, if we hired additional staff, the staff would be hired on a temporary basis or as casuals, and at the end of 2021, that would all disappear. We have included some capital projects, which, as you had suggested, Councillor Race, our attempt was to fund those projects because those projects could be supported by the COVID grant, and also because they met the necessary criteria. And we've included some projects, not a great deal, just over $200,000 of operating projects. Some of those operating projects, to Councillor Stone's point, for example, dollars associated with workstations, would otherwise be spent. Okay, but the amount that we are spending in 2021 reflects an increase in those costs over and above the normal amount that we would tax for And that increased amount is a direct result of COVID and our response to COVID. So I think that it's fair and reasonable to suggest that all the costs that we have identified as recoverable through the COVID grant, we anticipate will be spent in 2021, and they relate strictly to those projects, and those items of other operating expenses at the end of 2021 that we anticipate they will disappear, and or they may disappear prior to that, depending on how COVID is managed and how quickly we as a community pull out of this. So I think that these are very much a one-off type thing, and we're not attempting to use COVID to offset in any significant manner our tax dollars that we would normally spend. I hope that addresses your question.
Any other questions about the items listed under the COVID grants from councillors who haven't spoken yet? Councillor Anderson?
I wonder if we may have our economic development staff available as to the nature of the data that's being collected. I wondered whether this is available in reports, for example. I haven't had a chance to discuss this in any sort of detail, but if there could be a brief review of what type of data is being collected and where is it available. Thank you.
I see Ms. Woodside's on the call.
Through the chair, I can speak to this. So the data collection budget is for a variety of different data tools that the team uses. So it's not, it doesn't contribute to one report, but it actually informs all of our work. So some of the examples include our economic development dashboard indicators. So the data is used to populate that dashboard every year. We also use it to develop labor market profiles that we have on our website. And also for employment space research. In addition, we often get inquiries from local businesses who are developing business plans or growth plans. So we use it to support them when they have questions. And let's see if there's something else. Yeah, that would be the main uses of the data collection budget.
Thank you.
Some of the questions I had, the library internal space improvements is listed at 100,000. And when we heard the request from the library, it was at 50,000. And then the SLRD has granted through Area D up to 50,000 if that's what so they would match up to the amount that the district provided. So between the 50,000 that was originally in the ask from the library and the 50,000 from Area D, that's $100,000. And so I was surprised to see this in the COVID restart section. Why are we going above and beyond? They have $100,000 if you add what the original ask was with the SLRD area rep contribution.
Through the chair to address that question, we have had contact with the SLRD with respect to COVID funding, but we've not received any specific direction as to what their specific plans are and how that might directly impact us at this point in time.
These are funds that the Area D director set aside, and it was approved by the board some time ago. So there's $50,000 for the library, up to $50,000 set aside from the SLRD Area D rep. So that's Tony Rainbow. So that means if we put our 50,000 in, they'll get that full amount from Tony, which equals 100,000. So I can't imagine that we need this full allotment as you've listed here in the COVID recovery fund.
Through the chair, I think that's wonderful news. And to be fair, I wasn't aware of it before today, so
Yeah.
I can't make any further comment.
So I think, to me, I think we should check on that because I think our contribution should only be 50,000. Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I was curious about this number as well, and to me, the question was, in a presentation from the library, we considered sort of moving some funds from one internally in their budget to compensate for a decrease in, or an increase in operating expenses and decrease in revenue, but also decrease in the guard service. And I wonder if this portion represents that top up, because it could be funded through the COVID response rather than through the internal sort of shuffle. And perhaps that's where the difference is coming from. Because I believe I think it was the same meeting that we heard about this COVID response funding. So I wasn't certain what the solution was going to be for that shortfall.
I think then there would have to be a line item under the operational COVID funds as well as capital. And so I think it's worth a conversation with the library to make sure that we're clear on what is being funded through this. The other piece that I wanted to check on was speaks to having council meetings at the 55 Activity Center. And I really want to query that because what we know we're going to need as we recover is space and community space. And so does council really need to take up space at the 55 when we could use council chambers and potentially just have 4 councillors back at any one meeting and 3 participating from home and do that kind of rotation? I'm just really concerned that we're going to spend money trying to meet at the 55, which is not an ideal place. It's not a comfortable place to meet for our long meetings, and then we'll be taking up programming space. I don't know how other councillors feel about it, but Councillor French and then Councillor Stoner.
Chair, I completely agree with you. I support the idea of 4 councillors in the council chamber and 3 at home, and then rotating it around so that everybody gets an opportunity to be in chambers. I prefer to see the 55 Activity Center stay open for programming. We all know how we're pressed for programming space, and to me, it makes more sense to keep councillors in chambers. Thanks.
Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, I guess my question would be, would it enable us to reduce our costs for the remote council meeting support? Like, would we still need to maintain Brennan Park as an access point? And if that's the case, then I wouldn't be supportive of moving us to the 55. But if we're able to consolidate those costs, it's not inexpensive for us to be running the public component at Brennan Park. So if we're able to consolidate that cost, then I'd be willing to entertain it.
Councillor Pangill?
Yeah, this one I was unsure about as well. I think depending on how COVID goes, even if there's more space when we're in the meeting, it's still fairly small shared bathrooms. And so, you know, as much as I would like to get together in person for more meetings, if possible, I was thinking more once a month or every 2 months or something rather than a regular thing. And I think remote, while it's not perfect, has been a pretty effective tool for the most part. And so to the degree we can save money doing that, I would prefer that.
Councillor Reyes and Councillor Herford.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a good sort of transition strategy, getting back to, in effect, full council meetings. I do miss seeing people in person, and I think from my perspective, it's more productive if we were all in the same room at the same time, but that's just not possible right now. So the idea of using the present council chambers on a rotating basis is appealing. Not that it's perfect, but I think I agree with Councillor French that I think one of the things we have to consider is now we're taking up another space, which is better used for programming perhaps. And so if we can get rid of some of that, I'm happy with that. So I would also agree to try to avoid the 55 if we could. Brennan Park's another issue. It's more of a public participation issue for me, but I would be happy to try to make it work in our present chambers for a number of different reasons if we could.
Councillor Everett?
Thank you. I suppose the question for me is more around public participation. So if meeting at the 55 does allow some level of public participation, then that would move it up the sort of the list of options. I think everybody, not just everybody in council chambers here, but you know, is adjusting to the changes, and I'd prefer to go to not be meeting remotely. So and anything that sort of moves in that direction, I think would be great. But if the 55 does allow, does facilitate more public attendance to some level, then to me, I think that's worth exploring. Otherwise, and if it doesn't, then we're not gaining that, making that that not having that positive effect, then moving to some sort of hybrid model inside council chambers is totally appropriate. But it's that public component that would push it over the edge for me.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges of the 55, because under the public health guidance, we have to have one entrance and one exit, and that's why the 55 couldn't be used for vaccination clinics, because it doesn't have that unless people take the elevator and go downstairs through the parkade. And so it would actually, the 55 would just be for us to be able to meet all together with some staff present, but the public couldn't attend because we couldn't meet all the requirements of the public health orders for one entrance, one exit, people not crossing paths, all that sort of thing. So that's why I think we should rethink why we would be there. Because it would just be for us. It would be for our benefit to all be together, but I think the greater need in the community is for programming space, and that we can hold on a little bit longer with perhaps a hybrid model. And then public participation, we would have to continue at Brennan Park. Because Chambers is also limited a little bit by that one entrance, one exit piece. Yeah.
With that context, then I don't see an advantage really to the 55, and I'd love to see how far we can use a hybrid model in Chambers. Seems appropriate when it's time to move from this lovely way of doing it.
Okay. Councillor Pettengill, I saw your hand earlier.
Yeah, thank you. And this item is later in the agenda, but it's flagged as a COVID non-discretionary funding, which is why I wanted to check on it. And it's the from the council resolution to have feminine hygiene products in municipal facilities. And I guess when I moved that, my intent was that this would just become, I'm not sure if I have the right term, but a service level increase and not something that is sort of re-examined every year. And so I just want to understand if that is still what would be contemplated here, notwithstanding the non-discretionary COVID piece, or is this currently proposed as just a one-time thing during COVID?
Through the chair, I believe I can address that question. What's been included in response to the items referred to council? There's a note there that says that this was funded partially through COVID dollars. There's two components to this. There's a component related to the purchasing of machines, and there's a component related to the ongoing supply of the machines. So what we're looking at is through the additional dollars that are made available in the janitorial budget, we're going to purchase the machines and supply the machines, and in 2021, those costs will be covered under the COVID grant. In 2022 and subsequent years, we would make an adjustment to the non-discretionary budget line for janitorial services to increase their supply budget. I believe the amount's roughly in the $2,000 range, and that would allow them to provide an ongoing supply, of these products in these facilities. So the intent is to make this an ongoing, make this change ongoing, and it's just that there are two components. So we're using the additional funding from made available from the grant to allow us to purchase the machines, which is the more expensive component. And then we would increase the budget in 2022 in janitorial to allow us to supply the machines that have been installed. I hope that addresses your question.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask about the administrative support? This is item number 2, additional administrative capacity for exempted min, FOI, and agendas. And the other one related to legislative services makes sense to me because of all the extra work we're doing to have multiple locations staffed. But this one seemed like just a general service level increase.
Through the chair, item number 2, administrative support, the increase that we're looking at there, those increases are specifically related to the requirement for us to have remote meetings and the requirements for us to have meetings in multiple locations. So to have a meeting held at Municipal Center and also allow us to have a public engagement space at Brennan Park. And to do that, because the meetings generally are in the evening, we are paying our staff extra time, and that is primarily what is driving the cost of this administrative support component. And so we anticipate that that will disappear after COVID, because then we will all come back together in one area, one central area, council chambers, and we'll also be able to realign our shift patterns, et cetera, so that it will be less expensive for us to be able to do that on an ongoing basis, as we had in the past.
Well, that makes sense to me under item 7, but not under item 2. So we're not publishing more agendas. We get FOIs all the time. They're not necessarily related to COVID. So I understand the need for people and people power when we're at Brennan Park and at City Hall, but we're not having more meetings. And if we're getting more FOIs, then that's just a general service level increase. It's not a COVID related. So there's item 2 and item 7. And then there's additional staff for the remote council meetings as item 3. So there's 3 line items here related to offsite meetings. So I'm just trying to understand what we're funding in item 2, 3, and 7. And the fear for me is that we're, as Councillor Stoner pointed out, we're putting in service level changes here that we'll necessarily have to adopt next year without saying that to the community. Like, we're going to fund it with COVID this year, but next year that staff person's not going away. This is a service level increase that we're going to fund this year through COVID funds. And so this is the nervousness that I have between some of these, where I don't understand what's truly temporary and what will come back to us next year and say, well, we funded it with COVID last year, but it actually was a service level increase. And so I really want that transparency for the public. Like, this one is likely to continue because we see an increase in FOI requests. This one is just about having extra bodies to manage Brennan Park when we do public hearings, and when that goes away, we don't need it anymore. And that's the disparity between 2, 3, and 7 that I can't figure out in my mind. Ms. Glende?
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. I know that Roland will be able to answer specifically around these 3 items when he digs into it. That said, the intent of the items on this list are not that they are service level increases funded this year by COVID that will come back again to council. That is not the intent. That's not the objective. If there's not clarity that needs to be had, we will provide that, whether Roland can do it right now or we can come back to council with that.
Ms. Boxrud?
Thank you, through the chair. The sections between the non-discretionary in the first section, the 583,000, as well as and then in addition, the 720,000. The 583 was what we brought to, that we were developing to council before the COVID grant came about. So this was our base level of what we had, that we required in order to continue with our service. The next piece was then when we were given the grant, we were like, okay, well, this could relieve a lot of pressure points that we were unable to fund before from the reserves. So that's an addition. So some of it looks like it's been sort of duplicated, but it hasn't. It's actually just showing it's a phasing of incremental spend as we've identified it and realized that we had more additional requirements. We can certainly provide more detail into what all of those pieces are as well.
I think that's important because we have over $100,000 in administrative and legislative services improvement. And so I'm really curious about what is driving that. We haven't held more meetings. We're not producing more agendas. So I think our community has to understand what's driving those 2 line items and how FOIs are even related to COVID, unless they're specifically COVID related, and we've gotten a whole onslaught of FOIs related to COVID-19. But I'd like to see that come back with a better explanation. I was wondering if someone could speak to the building inspection recovery contract position. Because this seems like work we were going to do anyway. And I think it's important for the community to understand how COVID has created the need for this.
Yes, Roland, I can perhaps address this one. COVID's had a fairly significant effect on our building department in terms of new processes and workload that we have to manage, and we have fallen behind and are struggling to get back to the timelines that we want to see in the community. And I know that council has been hearing from folks that they're not happy with the turnaround times that we have. So this is a contract position through 2021 to get those timelines back to where they need to be, and then it ends. It is not a service level improvement beyond that point. It's just to get us back to where we need to be in terms of service level expectations.
Is it realistic, Mr. Buxton, to think that people who are trying to get us caught up on reviewing plans can also create a CPP program? Which I understand is not an insignificant amount of work.
That is also one of the things that we want to take on with this position, to get that instituted. We currently have someone on staff who's covering a leave right now, who has some background in that, coupled with consulting, with contracted consulting services. We think we can get that up and running likely in 21 as well. That's the Certified Professional Program, the CP, which is essentially a program whereby most of all, if not all of the responsibility falls on a certified professional who supervises the project from start to finish.
And when we speak to a 10-week review period for general permits, we had a lower threshold for like tenant improvement. Are we still meeting those timelines?
We have in recent times gone back to prioritizing those. I'm not exactly sure where we're at on those right now.
Okay. questions? I think my last one is that we have funds set aside for covered structures for parks and parklets and container covered public spaces. And I'm wondering if staff can speak to the difference between those and if we can release funds early to get them built sooner rather than later.
I can attack the first part of that question in terms of the difference between the two. One of which is a more temporary modular solution that we can move on relatively quickly. And the second one is more permanent structures in parks that are going to take a little longer to get designed and implemented. But we think we can get both of them done, starting with a covered structure in the Dentville Park. And Roland, if you want to update council on how we can approach the funding on that into 2021 and get things started quickly.
The chair to comment on Mr. Buxton's.
Could you speak up, Mr. Russell? We're just having a hard time hearing you.
Quickly on the parklet component. We have project in the 2021 financial plan, in the 2021 year of the 2020 approved financial plan for covered structures at parks, and we anticipate that we could use that funding, which is part of the approved budget today, to kickstart our expenses related to parklets while we wait for the 2021 financial plan bylaw to be approved. So we believe that we have the ability to get started in January on the parklet project, and as Mr. Buxton said, the other project's going to take a little longer because there's a little more design work required around that, and so that will commence, but the true cost won't be experienced until later in the year. I hope that helps to address your question. I believe Ms. Colbeck might have some additional information to add.
Thanks, through the chair. Yeah, just briefly wanted to just share staff are beginning work planning on this right now, and we'll get all the pieces in place ready to go for January. If council is supportive of this, we are aware that this is something that is a more urgent community need, and are prioritizing getting work done right away.
We did have a specific request from a young woman for her grandfather for a Stan Clark Park. So I heard Dentville mentioned, but there's definitely a demand for Stan Clark. Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, I was just curious on these two items, as well as the public space design guidelines and standards, if that will also include any additional access to public washrooms or consideration thereof.
Yeah, through the chair, that is certainly something that we are considering as part of the larger design work, not part of the short-term parklet piece, but the other part, we will be looking at that and whether or not it makes sense in which locations to increase access to public bathrooms through that covered structure work. That's certainly come up a number of times as a need with respect to COVID.
All right, any other questions on the restart fund items specifically? Okay, Councillor Ray.
Well, just as to process, I think staff are looking for motions, if I understood the opening comments, to endorse some of these. And I was prepared to put a motion forward endorsing this part of it, subject to the comments on items 2, 3, 7, 11, 12, and 22. And I'm just wondering when this might, if that's appropriate, And then when this might come back to us to finalize, I assume that would be in January sometime when we get the information that we've asked for.
Potentially. I think I'd like to save motions towards the end of the meeting so that we can see the capital and special projects in relation to the restart funds, and then council has that broader view and then can make some decisions going forward. But I think you've noted the ones that council is asked for more information on.
Okay, fair enough. Happy with that.
Okay. Mr. Russell, if you want to touch on the next part of your presentation.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Okay. I will continue. In continuing, I'd like to speak about our special operating projects. Special operating projects that are included here, total of just under $4 million. It should be noted that within this $4 million, included in here or embedded in here are the special operating projects that we just spoke about with respect to COVID. If you can note down here, they have been identified separately, and I believe there's a typo in there, actually 13. This outlines the total cost that we expect to be funded by taxation, which is just over just under $575,000. It outlines the different groupings that for which these projects fall into: strategic, master plan, and public service. I'd like to highlight some highlights around this are provided on this slide. And what we would like to highlight is our climate response projects. There are climate mitigation projects for just over 190,000, climate adaptation projects for just over 600,000, which brings total climate projects to about $800,000, which is roughly 20% of the total operating projects. We have projects and facilities maintenance, infrastructure, operating infrastructure, and some of the other projects that would like to highlight as an example under strategic plan would be the emerging sector roadmap, and under master plan projects are projects such as asset management plan update and the storage sewer inventory condition assessment. So these are some of the larger projects that we are undertaking within the special project grouping. Clearly, the largest single project and or group of projects associated with our special projects this year are projects related to COVID, thankfully. We've been able to present those, and we had some questions that we need to get back to council on. And at this point in time, we'd like to highlight effectively the remainder of our projects. And we'd like to highlight the remainder of our projects, and we're hoping at this point that we take a brief pause and council could address questions related to special projects. We will be able to address those at this point. Thank you.
So just for clarity, the COVID funds we just talked about, Mr. Russell?
Turn this back over to the chair so they can ask questions.
So just for clarity, the COVID restart funds we just spoke about do appear throughout this budget. So like you just pointed out, the economic recovery action plan, it's in both places, but it's not double counted.
It is in both places. It is not double counted.
Thank you.
It is part of our special projects, so to show you the total of the special projects, that would also include special projects that are funded by.
So its funding would show up under grants and other as its source of funding if it was part of the restart fund versus taxation.
I'm sorry, I'm going to take a quick look at the chart to make sure that I answer your question correctly, Mary Elliott. I have a sneaky suspicion that we put it in the first column, so I just want to confirm that. Yes, the answer to that question is yes. It is shown as under the column grants. That's correct.
Grants and other, okay. Okay, Council, we're on to special projects. Question. Council Pango.
Yeah, so a few, combine number 22, airport strategy, and number 29, downtown entrance and transportation modal study, I believe. And actually even 45, street pole replacement. Just wondering if staff can speak to what sort of assumptions we're making, and with the airport, I mean, we're seeing technologies changing rapidly. People, it seems Harbor Air is announcing going to electric flights, and so fuel needs will change. We have sort of identified the need to shift away from a car. With street poles, we've talked about the opportunity to build in chargers into street poles. So just wondering if staff can comment how are we making new assumptions in terms of where we want to head to, or you know, the demands of traffic, what flight needs to be or flight will look like in the near term, or can staff speak to how we're sort of incorporating some of these evolving technologies in our thoughts and these plans?
Through the chair, I can respond with respect to the multimodal transportation plan and streetlight replacement. Yes, we are. I mean, we are actively considering and looking to install chargers on downtown streetlights because of the LED reduction in capacity. So yes, we're looking at that. And the multimodal transportation plan, by its nature, is going to have to consider different modes of transportation. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a plan. I mean, in terms of the airport, I would have to defer to Neil on, or someone from real estate. But yes, I mean, we are trying to consider new technology, new directions in all of the planning work that we do.
Mr. Wickham put his hand up, and so the CAO. Do you want me to go to Chris first? I'll go to Mr. Wickham.
Yes, sorry. Through the chair, I have been somewhat involved in the early stages of the airport plan, so I can just to say that's a little bit of a different item, whereas the other two items that Mr. Buxton referred to are directly our infrastructure. The airport plan is largely about leasing to customers and what economic development can happen there, and that's really going to be up to those businesses to look to the future. The length of runway is constrained by aerodynamics and probably won't change with electric aircraft. And it's really those businesses that are providing fuel, et cetera, at the airport at this time. So to that point, at least, we don't need to prognosticate too much.
Do you follow up, Council Pengill, or do you want to say something, Tia?
No, I had Ms. Gill on, but she has just indicated to me that Chris has accurately answered the question.
All right.
Okay, I'm done with that topic. I have a couple others if I can continue.
Go ahead.
Okay, and I appreciate the responses. Thank you. It's good to hear that we are challenging some of our previous assumptions. The number 42, community carbon marketplace. I had, and there's been some discussion back and forth on this, but I had thought that there were some challenges in what we were wanting to do or how we had originally envisioned this. So is this work to sort of figure out if we can still proceed or how to proceed, or do we now have confirmation that we are good to go with the model we had for this marketplace?
I can step in here. So my understanding is that the general model of the marketplace is good. What we really need to do is expand the supply of credits, expand the demand, and the big thing we need to do is expand, improve our validation and accounting. So what we need to do is marry the framework we have with Accountant, which has a really good interface with more appropriate validation and accounting mechanisms. So that's the big area we need to make improvements. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think two more topics. Number 68, Public Works Music Festival support. Was a little bit surprised to see a line item in 2021, which seems a little bit optimistic. I'm just wondering if staff can speak to that.
Yes, through the chair. We need to be optimistic in terms of if the restarting the economy allows for any form of concert to take place. We need to have those funds in the budget, otherwise we can expend them. They're offset by, I believe, to zero that out from incoming revenue from whatever concert promoter is able to get to that point. So it's a zero line budget item because it's offset with revenue.
Okay, thank you. And then the last, there's a couple items related to truth and reconciliation, Indigenous cultural safety and cultural humility training, and so on, which I'm happy to see. It does seem like a lot of our plans are focused specifically on First Nations related things and not other, I guess, equity deserving populations. And so I'm just wondering if staff can speak to, is there on purpose a very specific First Nations focus, or do we expect these programs to cover a broader range of inclusivity and equity?
I'll get the CAO to respond, and the answer is both.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mayor Elliott. Yes, the Council Strategic Projects idea in caps, it says new, looks like it's number 4, is specifically focused on inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, which is what IDEA represents as an acronym. And this is an initial project scoping to launch our work with inclusion and diversity generally, and scope out what that will look like as we start it next year more fulsomely, and then in many years going ahead. Truth and reconciliation specifically will dovetail with that, but is also included in the CAO Strategic Project Annual Envelope as one of my deliverables as the CAO to lead that process with actioning under it through the organization. And then the council project specifically that is new is a specific project that we've inserted for council consideration around a potential language project for council. So to Councillor or Mayor Elliott's point, the answer is yes to both.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's it, Councillor Pettengill?
I'm sure I could make up a lot more questions if you'd like.
No, I don't need you to make up any. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. I just wondering if staff can speak to how a few of these projects will intertwine. So there's a downtown streets concept designs, which is carryover from last year, the public space design guidelines and standards, and then there's a DCC project on downtown entrance study. I'm just curious how those three interact and or differ.
Mr. Buxton, you're on mute still.
There we go. Sorry about that. The latter is focused really on Cleveland north from Pemberton. The first one is really the streetscape standards, is really around road design, and the streetscape standards, or the other one, I'm forgetting the titles, is a more general urban design, so an interaction of buildings with streetscape. So one is Cleveland North, one is literally street design, one of which is how the urban design interacts with that streetscape. So they're all somewhat related in a way. Does that provide a reasonable explanation?
Yeah, I guess the downtown streets concept design and the public space, which is now design guidelines and standards, which is part of the COVID recovery. I'm just curious how those two interact, I guess, as well. Or the differentiation.
I say one of them is, I say, the street design is really how the horizontal element will function, where the curbs sit, where the landscaped areas sit, how's the public realm designed. The streetscape design standards is that. So yes, there is definitely some crossover there, but then how does that interact with the built realm, which is both public and private? So the streetscape design standards then moves over into the interface between the public and private realm. The streetscape will be public realm.
Okay, and then something that is not in the budget, but we did have some conversations about when the downtown parkade study came forward. Council did discuss options for both increasing the cash and lieu component for parking, as well as different interventions that we may be able to consider for downtown, such as pay parking. And there's no budget items for implementation of that. So I'm just curious where that project sits.
At present, sorry, through the chair, basically it's a capacity related issue. Trying to find time and resources to advance any of those next year would be difficult given the workload that's already on the table.
I just wanted to flag for staff item 59, which is the Squamish Valley Agriculture Plan implementation. And I know the Food Policy Council has approached us for 20,000, but also SLRD Area D representative for 20,000. But Director Rainbow and I share the Southern PILT funds, payment in lieu of taxes. And I want to discuss with him, since this is a joint project, that rather than 20,000 from each of us, is that we contribute 40,000 from the Southern PILT Fund to cover the implementation. So I would like to just flag that as something that might change going forward, because that's a funding envelope that he and I share and can make decisions about, and this would seem like an appropriate project to do that with. So I just want to confirm that that's possible with him before we put it in our budget each year. And the other one, just to correct, is that the steep slopes DPA currently funded through taxation, but I understand that planning staff have signed an agreement with the CHIMAs to fund that work, so it should appear under a different column.
That's good. We'll make that change.
That's item 56. Councillor Firth.
Thank you. I had a question around item 52. Is the STR related? Enforcement and legal costs. And there's nothing in 2021, but that funding kicks in 2022. Is that covered and there's some other area, or we're not expecting to have that issue, or am I reading it incorrectly, or some other?
So if I think that might be because there are some carryover funds from 2020 that are unspent because we've taken this long to sort of get to the point of starting. So I think though for 2021 there are carryover funds from 2020.
Okay.
But further to Councillor Herbert's question, we are collecting fees, and weren't those to cover some of our expenses, or are these expenses above and beyond the fees we're collecting?
The fees are intended to cover the bylaw and the additional bylaw enforcement staffing, and they should do that. These are anticipated once we get into enforcement, that there will be inevitable legal expenses. So these are to cover contingencies like that. So they are sort of above and beyond the fee collection level. We don't anticipate.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. The other one, item 47, the dike vegetation removal, sounds like an ongoing project, but it doesn't continue on into. This strikes me as a project, and I could be wrong. I mean, those, by the time you get to the end of it, you got to go back to the beginning and just sort of keep going. But there's nothing in the financial plan kind of out into that 2025. And it doesn't ever feel like we'd be done. So I just wondered if that was appropriate and or best practices to have an annual, just sort of reoccurring.
Yes, sorry, through the chair, I can respond to that. And Bob, actually, I'll let Bob talk to this one. Bob Smith is online.
Morning, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Hi, Bob.
Great. Yeah, this is basically the big stuff, as we call it. So we've got an annual budget to do the stuff that's been knocked down previously, but it's almost merchantable timber. The stuff is so big, so it's a lot more challenging to deal with. We've got to deal with DFO and environment. We bring contractors in, so it's a lot more significant than our normal kind of annual vegetation control. And hopefully in 5 years we'll get to the end of it, but we'll see. It's definitely challenging. And the last section, just for reference for council, mayor and council, would be the section by the golf course. That's an example of what the work looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? One that caught my eye, and perhaps planning staff could speak to it, is item 57. So we've had developers fund the review of their projects in the past, but I've never seen this line item in the budget. And so we do have neighborhood area planning in 55, which is one of the things directed in our strategic plan and the OCP, but 57 was an outlier to me.
Yes, so through the chair, neighbourhood area planning 55 would be work that we undertake, and I think the intent was to look at Garibaldi Estates would be the next area plan that we take on after Loggers East. The 57, the neighbourhood planning subject to private application, is we know we have at least one neighbourhood area plan that the developer is willing to fund. And again, if we want to be able to advance some work on that the developer funds, we need to have the outgoing revenue offset by the outgoing expenses offset by the incoming revenue. So again, this 57 will be a zero line item. Incoming revenue will offset any expenses for a developer driven neighbourhood plan.
How did you account for those in the past, Mr. Buxton?
Through the chair, I don't know that we have done that, other than we have accounted for additional funds in probably the consulting line item in planning. So money flows into that from the developer and then out of that to pay for the contracted expenses.
Yeah, it's just never been at this level. We haven't seen it at this level. Like when I think of Waterfront Landing or or Garibaldi Springs, it didn't flow through the budget as a line item. So it's just a different approach, or is this a different scale of work? Because those two are both pretty big.
Yes, to be honest, yes, we probably could have shown the waterfront landing in the same manner as we are showing it here, in terms of it being a discrete piece of planning work and a particular project, as opposed to a specific application-based agreement that we have with developers sometimes. So it could have been shown that way, yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can we move on to the capital plan? Okay, don't hesitate to raise your hands a bit earlier. Councillor Anderson and Councillor Pattengill.
Thank you. I'd like to start with asking a question regarding the number 58 Heritage Protection Framework scoping. This is from the Planning and Building Department. The description refers to the retaining a qualified professional, quote, in the heritage regulation field. And I'm curious about the terms of reference for that consultant work, and I'll give a little bit of preamble to my concern or interest. I'm concerned that it appears as though there may be a large focus on buildings and on regulation rather than on a policy framework. And what I mean by policy framework is that, as most municipalities and as any heritage consultant would refer to, is a framework including DPA guidelines, development procedures, bylaw elements, attention to archives. In the case of Squamish, the district owns most of our archives. A context policy regarding use of context statements and statements of significance, not only for buildings, but for features such as geological or other kinds of things we have in our environment. So my question is, what is the nature of the terms of reference to be given to a consultant? And I guess my concern is that the terms of reference might be too narrowly focused on buildings, where that may in fact be a small part of our needs with respect to heritage conservation. And policy is the key word, policy framework. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Staff?
Yes, through the chair, those terms of reference have yet to be developed.
Thank you. Chair, I do have some additional questions on marine strategy, if I may proceed. First of all,
can I go back to your first question, Councillor Anderson? So there's 10,000 in the budget. If we were to look at the depth that Councillor Anderson is speaking to, is 10,000 enough?
Probably not. No, with all due respect, no. It's really focused on the built environment, which is where the legislation best sits.
I wanted to add that context for you, Councillor Anderson, because you moved on pretty quickly.
Thank you. I'm actually not in agreement with staff. I think a lot can be done with $10,000. And the Arts, Cultural and Heritage Strategy does presume a collaborative approach between the district and other stakeholders. That's just a comment. I am concerned about the policy framework and that we target ourselves properly in this effort. Thank you.
Go ahead. You had another question. Yes,
I do. This is number 35. Oh, excuse me, that's capital project. I'll save that for later. Just have to find my paperwork here. Number 44, Estuary Management Master Plan, Engineering. I believe that this needs some fuller discussion by council. I'd like to suggest that there should be that opportunity. There has not been a discussion by council of this undertaking. In over 2 years, 2018, early 2018, there was a fairly full last council took this on. I'd like to refer to the current estuary management plan. First of all, it is an integrated resource management plan, and the language in that plan is consistent in that respect. And I do observe that we have departed in our phrasing and our references and our description away from this. We're missing elements of the picture. The estuary management plan was a product of 20 years of dialogue and all kinds of stakeholders involved, but it can be called an integrated resource management plan. And I don't see that same consistent approach in descriptions of this undertaking. The estuary management plan is a port plan as well as being a conservation plan, and it is a port plan to deliver conservation. Secondly, the estuary management plan is an intergovernmental agreement. It is also involving regional stakeholders. Behind the signatures to the agreement are orders in council. So second point I'm making here, this has some legal status and some history as such. And I'm concerned that we should be exploring what we're leaving behind here. There is new attention by the province with marching orders given to Parliamentary Secretary Kelly Green and Minister Nathan Cullen to address estuary plans and to restore and ask the federal government to join in restoring senior government attention to them. This has been announced just in recent weeks. There are 2 review processes in the estuary management plan. We keep missing the second. The first is project review, but there's also plan and land use plan review. And this has been a consistent source of confusion. The coordinator role versus the chairing role. This was discussed 2 years ago in the council review at that time. And
Anderson, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. And so the final topic arising from the current estuary management plan is its geographic scope. It is mountain to mountain, and it includes the Malcolm Blind Channel. And I'm concerned that this geographic scope that is agreed to by that plan and has a great deal of rationale is being departed from. So I'll just leave it at that question for here is what is the geographic scope being undertaken here? The Squamish River Watershed Society first proposed and changed their mind about it. And now we're going back to what they first proposed and was rejected. So what is the geographic scope for this estuary master plan? As you can see, this is a bundle of issues, and I'd suggest it deserves fuller discussion.
And I think that would be my response, is that if we want to provide some greater direction on this, that would be a discussion with council in the new year.
Thank you.
Mr. Wickham, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Only in that, just on the narrow question of the geographic scope, that my understanding as we're framing this project, that this would include basically the entire area of the mast, which is actually greater than the SEMP area. It includes places further up the coast. So all of the original SEMP areas and potentially more, but that is part of the scope of the project to define.
Through the chair, thanks, Mr. Wickham. That I suggest is a topic for discussion itself, but there is some confusion around this. There is some perception that it's going to be limited to the westerly part of the estuary planning area. I do have another topic I'd like to ask about, Chair.
Please go ahead. I'd like to move on to the capital plan.
Yes, the number 50 Marine Action Strategy Administration. Again, here, I feel that this deserves fuller discussion and review. It is a multifaceted strategy and implementation plan, and it has defined focus areas, which was a good achievement and is a coherent implementation plan. And I'm concerned that we're taking a piecemeal approach or don't know what the whole picture is. And so I'll just suggest that we need to keep the implementation plan of 2018 in focus, because I think that there's some again integrated resource management elements there. There's multiple stakeholders and needs that need to be defined. And before we move on to things like we need to go back to the basics that are outlined as far as a work plan in that strategy. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Councillor Pettengill?
Yeah, thank you. Just want to check, we mentioned proponent-funded plans and studies a few times in the section. Just want to check in with staff what obligations we have to private funders for these things when they're funding a plan or a study in terms of timeline or outcome or anything like that. Are there any obligations?
Only to produce the body of work that's captured by the agreement for funding. So the agreement would be to prepare a steep slopes development permit area set of guidelines. I mean, I don't believe there are strict timelines in any of the agreements that we've executed because they're difficult to establish because we don't control them.
Okay, thank you.
The output will be clear in any agreement.
The key point being we hire and direct the consultants that are working on these, not the proponent. So they're our employee.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, can we move on to the capital plan? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Russell.
Thank you. I'd like to mention some highlights here. Oh, sorry. For our capital projects, this is an overall snapshot of capital projects that have been included in the plan. Just over $43 million. This reflects the general fund component of the capital plan. So that $43 million does not include the utility portion of the plan that was reviewed by council previously. And as you can see, there are a number of plans, a number of different large buckets of funding related to master plans and related to municipal services. So I wish to move on here briefly and talk about the climate response. And the reason I want to talk about climate response is that approximately 25% of our total project budgets, that's both operating projects and capital projects, is directed to projects related to climate response. As you can see here, and we provided you a package, it outlines the types of projects that we are doing. There are utility projects, there's ongoing operating projects and operating support. There are operating projects for approximately $800,000 and just a little over $11 million worth of capital projects that are climate related. And what we wanted to know is the majority of these projects show up on that previous listing under the category of master plan. And that's because they were master plan projects prior to the district adopting the climate emergency protocols in the last few years. And so although they are now considered strategic plan projects, they were originally identified as master plan projects, and we simply left that that nomenclature in place. And so I'd like to move on and speak about the capital plan highlights. Again, we relate to the fact that there's a number of projects associated with climate response. We're spending just over $300,000 at Brenham Park and roughly the same amount of just under $300,000 at the RCMP building. We have some other fairly significant infrastructure upgrade projects, Airport Runway, which is a grant-supported project, and also Denville Park, which is again another grant-supported project. And then some very large, significant projects that are near and dear to a number of people within the community, such as the new main fire hall in Valley Cliff. We are presenting the new public works facility, commencing in 2021, planning, ostensibly building. A fairly significant roadway project in Pioneer Way extension, and also technology transformation program. And this is the 2021 ask, which is just over $1 million. That's been split into two pieces, roughly $900,000 for technology transformation that will be funded through taxation, through debt. And then we've identified $200,000 component of the technology transformation program, which is specifically related to providing upgrades for the recreation components of the TTP system, and that is being funded through the BC Restart grant on the basis that it is being specifically designed to allow us to restart recreation and also to manage social distancing within the processes of being able to manage restart, i.e., so that we will be able to do online registration and things of this nature. Those types of costs are directly supported by the BC Restart grant. At this point in time, I'd like to alert my driver here, Tori, that we would like to show a short video on the technology transformation program. And after that video, we would return for questions to council at that point. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to ask our host, moderator, if she would proceed with the TTP video at this point.
Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Carrie Yang. I'm the Technology Transformation Program Manager, and this is a 2021 TTP financial plan. The objectives for this presentation is to provide Mayor and Council updates on our 2020 accomplishments, what we will deliver in the next 2 years, and the differences between the 2020 and the 2021 financial plans. The Technology Transformation Program, its purpose is to give the organization the digital tools to deliver outstanding service. In essence, the program is leading the organization with its migration from paper and manual-based processes, bringing these systems and processes to computers, and then making these services available online and on mobile platforms, which, quite frankly, is the expectation of our businesses, constituents, and our staff. The program launched in 2016, and we hit a major milestone in 2018 with the launch and implementation of our new financial management tools. We did incur delays, and these are because we underestimated the staff resource requirements, time needed for staff to work on technology projects. We weren't clearly aware of the state of our existing data and business processes, as these were years and years in the making. And it's taken time to sift through all this information so that what we bring over to the new tools is accurate and up to date. Staff readiness, what I mean by that is that not all staff in the organization have been exposed to a technology-based project, and so time was needed to get these individuals comfortable and confident. We use a lot of acronyms, so they can contribute to the project as it moves forward. And of course, there is staff turnover. There are other factors completely beyond our control that certainly caused some delays. However, with COVID-19, it certainly identified that we were on the correct path, and if anything, we needed to accelerate our pace from moving to online and mobile services. In spite of the challenges that we faced, 2020 has some fantastic, significant accomplishments. And these included the expansion, utilization, and optimization of our new financial management tool. We improved the speed and accuracy for financial reporting, so managers and supervisors have single and double-click access to their department's financial records, so they always have real-time visibility to the variances between their budget
and their actual spends. We launched a new payroll system. In so doing, 300 plus staff are no longer submitting their paper timesheets to municipal every week, as all the time information is being directly inputted to our financial management tool, and all pay processing is being done by that same system. We've developed a new procurement module, and this module, as we roll it out beginning in January of 2021, will eliminate our reliance on paper purchase orders while increasing the accuracy, transparency, and fiscal controls associated with requisition, purchase order issuance, the reception of goods and services, and the timeliness and accuracy of paying our suppliers. Additional accomplishments in 2020 was the launch of our development management service, starting with the implementation of the new business license system that went live on December the 11th. And we're queuing up for a very early release of the new development and building permit system coming early 2021. We know our existing recreation management system, like the other legacy processes that we have, is incredibly inflexible. We will be putting in a new system come 2022. We have spent the time. We have a new software vendor that's been selected, and the team is preparing to kick off this project early in the year and have it ready and available and bring all the services online to mobile devices for later on in the year. Over the course of the program, we've learned a ton of lessons. And we certainly recognize that a program such as this is more akin to a dial than a switch, as it takes time for organizations such as ours to move to its digital maturity. We are achieving success, and we're achieving success because we've increased our staff capability and confidence with our new tools, our financial and our development management platforms. We've improved our state of readiness for our technology projects. We know what data we have. We know our business processes. And the people that are joining the technology projects are getting increasingly comfortable with the methodology and with the tools that we're using. The payroll rollout was a fantastic example of all levels of management getting behind their staff, supporting them as they migrated from paper timesheets, embrace and adopt the new electronic timesheet format. And most importantly, we're achieving success, and we will continue, and a significant portion of the investment in 21 and 22 is so that staff have the dedicated time to work on a technology project, and just as important, their coverage, so they don't incur a service level decrease as these key staff members are away working on the projects. We'll be carrying forward the momentum that we've achieved in 2020, and we're going to build upon the lessons learned so that we're able to deliver on the roadmap that we put in place for 21 and 22. In 2021, we're going to continue to build upon our digital backbone. We're going to expand and optimize those systems that I was mentioning earlier in the presentation. We will implement our new development and building permit system. We will roll out our new procurement system. We will launch a new recreation management system. And we will initiate the replacement for new property tax, utility fee, and asset management tools, so they'll be ready and available come 2022. And in 2022, we want to bring our services online. We want to bring these services to a smartphone. So we will be launching an online service portal and creating mobile access for services such as property tax, utility fee payment, submission of license application, permit application, and payment. And most importantly, we will be providing mobile tools and applications for the field teams to receive an action or work order request on site versus what they're currently doing, which is need to go back to a district facility and collect that same work order. The table here shows the 2021 financial plan, and it has changed from the previous year. The top row shows the 2020 financial plan. The second row shows the 2021 financial plan. And what we believe is the investment required to continue our journey of migration from paper to computer to online and mobile platform, if anything, to accelerate its pace. The third row is the BC Restart funds that will be allocated to the program in 2021. And although nothing has been identified for 2022, we will work with Heather and the finance team so that we can dedicate funds from this program to the Technology Transfer Program Initiative for 2022. The last row shows the net change between 2020 and 2021 financial plans, and for Council's consideration, and with utilization of research funds, the 2021 financial plan net change from the previous year is $670,000. Our last slide provides a snapshot of the overall investment and the deliverables of the Technology Transformation Program from its inception to the end of 22. As discussed, we've launched our new digital backbone. We have a new financial management platform, a new development management platform. We've changed the way the organization does its payroll. We've launched a new business license system, and we have a procurement module that is ready to go come January. Over the course of the next 2 years, we will be changing the majority of our systems that are both public-facing and internal. This includes a new recreation management system, a new system for development permits and building permits, a new asset management system in incorporation with that, a work order management system, and all of these tools and all these systems will be available online and on mobile devices. In summary, the purpose of the program has been to give the organization the tools to always deliver outstanding service. In spite of significant challenges, we got some great accomplishments in the past year, and most importantly was the optimization and expansion of utilization of our financial management system. Next year, we will continue to expand utilization of these back-end systems, financial management, development management tools, and most importantly, we will invest in our staff. We'll invest in our staff so they can have the dedicated time to work on these technology projects and become the experts and champions of the tools for the departments. And in 2022, we're going to bring the services to a smartphone. All systems, all services will be available online, on mobile devices, because as I've said earlier, it is the expectation and has been the expectation of our residents, businesses, and of our staff. That concludes the presentation. I want to thank you for your time.
Okay, Mr. Russell? Oh, CEO Glende?
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. I just wanted to clarify that we tried something new here. Originally, Mr. Ng was to be off on holidays today, and we recognized that Council would have appreciated a more fulsome update on the TTP project given the financial plan changes contained. So with the effort that went into the recording, we thought we would try and present it in this vein anyway, and Mr. Ng is available this morning and is joining us if you do have questions about that presentation.
Mr. Russell, did you have anything more to say on the capital plan before I open up the floor to questions?
No, I do not. I was intending to open the floor to questions after the presentation. Please proceed.
Okay, so I've got Councillor Herford, then Councillor Race, then Councillor Anderson.
Thank you for yeah, my question is TTP related, and thank you for the presentation. I thought that that went well. I was excited to see what appears to be a finish line for this project, and I was curious about if there's an adjustment for sort of somewhere else in the budget that would represent the sort of the evergreening of these systems and potential sort of ongoing technology upgrades into the future after this sort of, I'm viewing this as a big push to get us to where we should be today, but to keep us current, and where that sits, as I haven't previously contemplated the end of the project.
Through the chair. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Mr. Ng.
Thank you for the question. And I believe Conrad's on the line as well. It's a great topic because these systems will need ongoing maintenance. These services are going to need ongoing support. The anticipation that we have is the program is funding that initial deployment and that first year of maintenance. And then the systems themselves and the ongoing support of that would be most likely rolled into the IT ongoing funds, with the notion that those that are working on the project are part of the IT team. They'll be able to continue the ongoing support of the project, and the ongoing funding for the ongoing maintenance for those projects for the systems would be part of that budget.
Any other questions on the capital plan? Councillor Herford?
That's good for me at this point. Thank you.
Councillor Race?
Thank you. My question is with respect to the annual paving program, which is item 23. And I'm looking at page 19 of 38 in the written one and page 17 of 24 on the computer. And so it shows in 2021 an expenditure of 1.45 million and then 1.35 for the next 4 years, in each of the next 4 years. And then the source of funding of that is accumulated surplus of 900,000, grants for 100,000, total tax amount, but $900,000 in taxation this year. So between taxation, grants, and accumulated surplus, that's $1.9 million for 1.45 in actual paving program. So that's part of the question. The next question is over the page. On the next page, there's also an item 23 active paving program, which shows $175,000 expenditure, all funded from accumulated surplus and nothing from taxation. So I'm wondering, somehow the numbers don't jive, and I'm just wondering if you could explain that, how much we're spending this coming year and the source of the funds. But also, we had a discussion about how much we should be spending on the paving program. Historically, it's been around $1 million, and we were sort of trying to ramp that up, and whether this proposed payment is consistent with that.
Through the chair, I'd be happy to answer that question. The numbers that we're presenting there, and I do understand how it could be a little bit confusing. I'll make sure that I'm focused on the correct line. What we're showing this year is $900,000 in tax funding, and we're adding to that $450,000 in accumulated surplus funding or reserve funding from our accumulated surplus, and we're adding to that an additional $100,000 in grant. And the rationale for the composite of that program is that as a result of COVID in 2020, we reduced the capital ask in total by $450,000. Since the largest single project in the capital plan that is tax supported is the roadways program, the paving program, that program took the largest hit of that adjustment in total tax support for the capital program. To offset that and to maintain the ongoing level of spending on the paving program, we made the decision to dip into the capital reserve and use our provision funds to increase, I shouldn't say increase, but maintain the level of funding at the level of roughly $1,350 per year. The extra $100,000 that's added in this year is related to a grant. That grant is specifically related to some new technology around cold mix, so let's say warm mix, paving process, a change in paving process, which we believe would be more effective, more efficient, and save on greenhouse gas. In addition to that, there were specific projects that were to be funded through the paving program in 2020 that were dependent upon certain levels of completion by developers so that we could come back in and repave the roads. They were part of the plan, specifically along Pemberton, I believe. And the development didn't progress at the speed that we had anticipated. So we weren't able to complete the project in 2020. That's why we're showing $175,000 of additional carry forward to allow us to complete that portion of the project in 2021. So our goal is to maintain the ongoing commitment to the paving program at a level of $1.35 million per year. That's a slight increase, I believe $100,000 increase over the commitment that we had made in 2020. I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
I think most of it. So the $175,000 item is that, it shows accumulated surplus funding. If that's Pemberton Avenue, is that not developer funding?
This specific portion is related to the portion that is our responsibility to inject into that portion of the project. And it's showing as accumulated surplus / provision because we had taxed for this amount in 2020. So because we haven't spent it, we're going to put it into a reserve, take it out of the reserve and spend it in 2021.
And then just to follow up on that, on the 900,000 coming from accumulated surplus, did I hear you say?
Sorry.
900,000 taxable, but what I'm looking at is also 900,000 from accumulated surplus. Should that be 450?
What you're seeing in the second section of the page shows the total funding over the 5-year period. So it's $900,000 from accumulated surplus over the 5-year period, $450,000 of which will occur in this year, and the other portions will occur in future years as we phase that out and increase the amount that is funded through taxation.
But then going back to our first conversation about COVID, are we using reserves then where we might be using taxation?
In this instance, we clearly are. We clearly are. And what in discussions with the engineering department, they did not consider it prudent to reduce the overall cost of the paving program by such a significant amount. They felt that it made more sense to access reserve funding over a temporary period while we reestablish the increase in taxation to support the paving program. So we've reduced the amount being supported by the paving program directly through taxation in 2021, and we're anticipating phasing that out over time and increasing the amount that will be supported by taxation in future years to bring it back to the level that will be similar to the level it was at in 2019 or 2020. And
I missed the point. Why are we doing that as opposed to just carrying on with taxation?
Because if we were to increase our taxation back to the same, let me rephrase that. For us to maintain the similar tax levels to what we had in 2020, which have been reduced as a result of COVID, we would have had to inject a significant tax increase in 2021 to fully refund the paving program. We did not think that that was prudent given the state of the economy at this point in time. We felt that it made more sense that if we needed to maintain the paving program, that we would use reserves and phase in the increase in taxation to bring the taxation levels back up to the level that they were at prior to COVID.
Okay, I have one other question, Mayor.
Go ahead.
With respect to item 31, the active transportation improvements, the amount shown for expenditure is $800,000. The only source of funds seems to be from grants and nothing from taxation. Historically, from my recollection, we've put in tax money into that. And I'm wondering if you can explain that.
Through the chair. Yes, in the past, we may well have. I have not been here for years and years into the past, just 2. And in the 2 years that I've been here, what I've seen from a funding perspective is that we're attempting to fund active transportation through the Community Works Fund grant that we received through UBCM, province of British Columbia, federal government. That funding is roughly $800,000 a year, and so we're attempting to spend that same level of funding on active transportation. In addition, in 2019, 2020, the province topped up the Community Works Fund amount. They provided an extra $800,000 effectively. And so with the additional grant that we received in 2019, 2020, the need to use taxation to support active transportation funding, we deemed that wasn't required. We deemed that we would be able to fund this fully from the Community Works Fund grants that we had received and that we had in our reserve.
This is what's referred to as the gas tax money sometimes?
Yes, it would be.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Just a clarification on Councillor Rice's question. So the 900,000 that's in accumulated surplus, it's supposed to be there, not under reserve. You kept saying we could pull it from reserve. But there's a column called reserve, and there's a column called accumulated surplus for provision. For the paving budget?
It's been identified as coming from, and just let me make sure that I have this quite correct in my head. I believe that we've identified the funding source as capital reserve, okay? And so the capital reserve in this instant, yeah, I'm thinking that we had identified it as capital reserve, and if that is the case, then my apologies, that should be corrected on the form, and we will take care of that.
Okay, I have Councillor Anderson and Stoner. Councillor Pettengill, are you going to ask a question? I'll put you on the list. Yep. Go ahead, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Item number 35, the Juanita Park Sea Dike. It's my understanding that we are seeking grant funding for the water access components as well as for the dike project, the water access, that is the dock. We discussed last July configuration of the dock and its implications for use. So my question is, has a dock configuration been decided? Will it be flexible enough to accommodate a variety of uses in future? Because the use component is something that we have really to explore further, in my view, through the Marine Action Strategy. So is there a design that the district is going towards the grant funding program with?
Through the chair, we do have a 90% design for the water access for Juanita Park. We've been working with local marine user groups to determine that. We are fairly set on the configuration of it at this point, so that's what we've used to submit to the grant agencies.
Will then you have an idea for user groups, and could you confirm whether or not that includes motorized vessels or the capability to incorporate that with the design that you have in mind?
Through the mayor, so currently the water access ramp and dock would only be for hand operated craft, nothing motorized. We have
attempted to build in flexibility so that there's an intermediate platform on the gangway and that an additional ramp could be extended off of that into another open part of our water lot, and that could have a variety of potential uses. So at this point, it hasn't been incorporated into what's proposed to be built, but we are building in flexibility for potential future uses.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Move on. Do you have another question?
No, just a comment. Again, we need to discuss an overall picture of uses of our waterfront as part of the implementation of the Marine Action Strategy. Thank you.
Yeah. Councilor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, just 3 quick questions. On the overall paving and active transportation, I noticed in the special operating budget, there is a line item for active transportation trail pavement maintenance that adds $15,000 a year to the special ops budget. And I'm just curious why that wouldn't be showing up in the capital project or as part of the active transportation improvements.
Through the chair, I believe I can address that question. I see you popped up, Bob, but I'll just jump in here, okay?
Mr. Smith on the line, if you would like Mr. Smith to answer him.
The request for the operating project for $15,000, that's ongoing maintenance cost, and at a value of $15,000, we would not be able to capitalize that cost for that maintenance. So decision was made that that should be funded through the operating budget as opposed to capital budget.
Okay. And then on line item 60, the pickleball courts, there's 25,000 of that coming from grant or other. And I'm just curious if we know what grant source that would be. That's something we're pursuing or something that the community is pursuing?
Through the chair, last year, we were informed that the Pickleball Association was going to proceed with a grant application, I believe, to Whistler Foundation, something along those lines. And we had put off this project that we had a long discussion around last year, and we left it in the budget on the basis that if they were able to achieve the grant, if they were able to receive the grant, that we would have the project available in the budget, and that we would be able to proceed with it in 2021.
So that's just, I just want to make sure that that's the same agreement to date, that if they bring forward that portion of the funding, then we can pursue it.
To the best of my understanding, yes.
Okay. And then one further question on line item 58, the safety netting for the Mamquam River. I'm just curious if, I guess, if there have been any injuries to date and why this is identified as a priority at this point.
Through the mayor, yes, there has been.
Thank you.
Is that it, Councilor Stoner? Councilor Pango?
Yeah, thank you. Just with the fiber conduit, I see there's a contract to TELUS for $175,000 related to this. And my recollection from before I was on council was that at some point there was a desire to sublease some of this infrastructure to Shaw or TELUS, and some of our infrastructure wasn't up to their standards. But now TELUS is seemingly maintaining some of it. And so I'm just wondering, do we have the capacity to lease any of this network to other providers or to generate some revenue as well as our own use? So presumably there's a fair bit of bandwidth there that this might be a possibility.
I can speak to that through the mayor. At this time, our dark fiber network is really just connecting 3 buildings. So we are starting to use it for ourselves. I wouldn't rule out having that capability in the future of having others utilize that infrastructure, but at this time we're not ready to make that move. But it is something we would consider for the future once our entire all our connections are in place.
Okay, thank you. And then just on the TTP, the video was helpful. I know there had been some scope creep, and so we've made some adjustments to the project. It sounds like over the period of 2021 through 2023, costs have gone up another 700,000, give or take, and that's even inclusive of putting some COVID money towards that. So it seems that we appear to still be having a significant amount of creep, and I'm just wondering if staff can speak to that a little bit.
Thank you, and through the chair. Not so much creep as much as, I guess, as per my presentation, the underestimation of the amount of time, the amount of staff time each of these projects are going to require. So the majority of the funding for the 2 years, in both years, is staff investment. So it's not to contractors, not to software, but to staff, so that these individuals have the necessary time to work on the projects, so that the projects become not the side of their desk, but the desk. And on the flip side is that there's funding for those departments, because these are key staff individuals, so that their departments have the necessary backfill, so that there's no service level decreases as we literally steal these individuals to work on these projects, so that they in turn become key contributors on the project. So once the project launches, they're able to continue on with being the internal champions for those services. So I would suggest in an answer is that not so much creep in terms of the overall scope, but creep in terms of the need for us to invest in our staff and use the majority of the funding for both years, so that the staff have the time to work on the projects and the departments don't see a hit in terms of service levels.
Okay, thank you. And then just sort of final question, I wonder if I could circle back to the paving piece, in terms of, it sounds like now a lot of the money, or there's a significant chunk coming from reserves, which makes me think this isn't, I guess it's not clear to me, are we trying to level tax increases? And I guess in my mind, if it's coming from reserves, that's just sort of what the reserve is probably should be there for, and we would expect money in the reserve on an ongoing basis. And I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around, is there a gap in our funding that has come up in the last year or two for some reason, that we have to make up for again at some point? Like we can get by with a reserve or something else for a year or two, but then there's going to be this gap. I'm just, it sounded like there was a funding shortfall in the last year or two, which I wasn't aware that we had, and I'm just trying to understand that.
Council did make decisions to cut the paving budget in previous years, reducing it by 100,000 here or 200,000 there. But I'll go to you, Mr. Russell.
Yeah.
So staff are trying to play catch up. This is where they want the level to be to make up for not hitting the required level in previous years. That's my understanding.
Good Chair, yes, that's correct. As a result of the decision in 2020 to amend the budget and reduce the capital ask, the result of that in 2021 is an ongoing reduction in tax funding of capital. Rather than trying to recoup all of this in a single year, we deemed it more prudent to increase the funding over 3 years and offset that loss in tax supported funding through the use of reserves, so that there's not a funding shortfall per se. It's simply a choice to maintain the level of the program and use a different funding source. I hope that addressed your question, Councillor Pettigrew.
Okay, thank you. I didn't recall that we had reduced the funding amount relative to the plan last year, but okay, that helps explain it then. Thank you.
Multiple years and going back to the last council. Consistently. Councillor Stoner?
Just to follow up on that point, when this was the first year of our term in 2018, and staff brought us the paving plan, which suggested a 1.4, I think it was 1.2 to 1.4 million a year to catch up on terms of that would be the level playing field that was needed in order to get our paving program up to speed. I'm looking at the presentation that staff gave us on the tax reductions in May 2020, and it does not include any reductions to the paving budget in that presentation. And so I too am still confused about where this reduction has occurred and how we're playing catch up on it.
To address that, we reduced the budget by $450,000 in 2020. The programs and projects that were reduced were not were funded by tax. They were not the paving program. When we looked at the various programs that we fund through tax in 2021, we recognized that if we still wanted to invest money in other programs outside of the paving program, we would have to reduce the tax support of the paving program to allow tax funding to be applied to other areas throughout the organization, which seems fair and reasonable. And so as a result of that, we applied the reduction in funding that occurred in 2020 to the 2021 tax funding of the paving program, and then are slowly going to increase tax funding back into the capital plan. It will be against the paving program over time to bring it back up to the level that it was prior to the reduction due to COVID, because we didn't deem it appropriate to try to recoup the $450,000 reduction in 1 year. And so rather than cannibalize all the other spending that's tax supported, we thought that it was most appropriate to reduce the tax support to the paving program, because that's the sole largest use of tax support within our capital program. All the other areas, ongoing asset management within the capital program, are sponsored and supported by an area outside of taxation. And so really only the paving program is the last major program that is more or less fully tax supported. So that's the area that had to take the hit, because we had reduced the tax support for the capital plan. So to allow the capital plan to support projects in other departments, we had to reduce the tax funding associated with the paving program. We're supporting the paving program through the use of reserves, and over time we will replace those reserves with tax levy. But we're going to phase that back in over a 3-year period. I hope that addresses the questions.
Councillor Rice, is it on the same topic? Go ahead.
So when I understand that, because as the mayor said, over the years we've reduced the contribution to the paving program. It historically was $1 million, and I recall the discussions last term, which dropped it down to $900,000. And so we take staff's point that we're not actually reducing it. We're going from 900 now to 1.45 this year, but 1.35 for the balance of the 5-year program. So it seems that the 1.35 is the number. And I recall that the study that Councillor Stoner referred to, saying that we were essentially underfunding what was really required to maintain our roads in the way they should be. So I take it that that's a 1.35 number. And so really what I'm questioning is if we're trying to get from 900,000 to 1.35, it seems that we're not taking a step this year. That $450,000 difference is being funded from accumulated surplus or some reserve, as opposed to being one of the steps in taxation. And so, for example, why wouldn't we go from $900,000 from taxation to say 1.1 million or 1.15 million or something like that as part of the way there and take a little bit less out of reserve? So otherwise, we're taking 2 years, 2022 and 2023, to get from 900,000 taxation to 1.35 in taxation. And so it spreads it over 3 years as opposed to 2 years. And that's also on the same point, to the mayor's earlier point about the reserve it's coming out of. I would have thought that this would come out of accumulated surplus, which I know we're talking about redesignating. But if it's coming out of some other reserve, what is that other reserve for? What was it originally set up for? If it's accumulated surplus, I understand, but if it's something else, I think that's a discussion point as well.
To the chair.
Yep.
I apologize for an error I made earlier. I stated that I believe this was coming out of the capital reserve. It is not. I went back, slight break, and rechecked the spreadsheet that we have that documents this. It is in fact coming out of accumulated surplus. Okay, so I apologize for that. There's the correction. Really, truly, the rationale for spreading it out over 3 years as opposed to 2 years is the economy has taken a real hit this year, okay, due to COVID. And administration didn't feel that it was appropriate to try to rush back into getting this number back up. We felt that it was probably more prudent for us to try to maintain a slow, steady slope back up than to dramatically increase tax rates this year, because we anticipated that there would be some type of COVID hangover occurring in 2021, and there would be a drag on the economy. So probably wasn't the best time for us to try to, have a dramatic jump in tax rates.
Okay. You good?
Yeah, on that point. Thank you.
Okay. I have a couple of questions related to the reserve for vehicles. So in the past, when there's been a new big ticket item, it's never come out of the reserve because the reserve wasn't being used for new vehicles. It was sort of there to replace our existing. But I note that we have a garbage truck coming out of reserve, as well as a new active transportation maintenance machine. Both of those are pretty big ticket items, 266,000, 180,000, and there's money in the reserve for those, which I'm curious about. Usually in the past, we've seen those come out of taxation. And then also in a future project, we have a replacement of a pumper truck for $1 million, and that's coming purely from borrowing and nothing from reserve. So I'm wondering if you could speak to what has changed.
Yes, I can. We are working, finance is working with Public Works to review the fleet reserve policy. And we believe that given the total value of the reserve currently, which is in excess of $5 million, that the reserve there are sufficient dollars within the reserve to allow the reserve to fund new purchases in addition to replacements and that we would be able to adjust the rates going into the reserves to the fleet reserve to reflect that when we have an opportunity to sit down and reevaluate the timing and pricing of the fleet reserve. We think that it's maybe there's enough money within that reserve to allow the reserve to both purchase and replace equipment, given that it has $5 million in it. And when we look at the timing requirements around the existing vehicles that we have in the fleet, we don't see a situation where we're going to have a really, really large drawdown on that reserve in the near future. So we think that this would be an opportunity for us to pivot from a reserve that is solely used for replacement to a reserve that is used both for replacement and for the purchasing of new vehicles where warranted.
Okay.
That being said, this is only with respect to tax supported areas. So there's still an expectation that if utilities wish to purchase new vehicles, that they will pay for those new vehicles through utility rates and fees, as opposed to through taxation or through the use of the fleet reserve. So it's
and then fire. How come there's no reserve?
We believe that we put enough money into the fleet reserve through the process of taxation, that we can now use that reserve to purchase new vehicles also.
And then the pumper truck. How come there's no reserve for that?
The pumper truck is one that I think is still kind of up in the air. Where, to be fair, I'm trying to determine whether that specific vehicle has been contributed throughout the history into the reserve, in which case, then yeah, potentially we should reevaluate that and charge it to the reserve as opposed to issue debt for it. But again, that's one that has a question mark beside it, and clearly we need to review the equipment reserve bylaw before we can finalize that decision.
Yeah. And then, is there a service level change that I've forgotten about for that new active transportation maintenance machine?
No, that's not a service level change. That's a capital request for us to purchase the machine.
But you need someone to drive it, and there's already someone driving our other one. And so I'm just asking if we have coverage to have two, since the other one's being used all the time.
I'm going to let Bob or Gary answer that.
Yeah, that's not in 2021, is it? 2021 or 2022 for the second?
The active transportation machine is showing in 2021.
Last time we bought one of these, it came with a person.
You, Mr. Smith?
Through the chair. Yeah, this one, we've got multiple staff that are trained to operate that machine, so we can run it with our existing staff during a snow or a storm event. We can run it with our existing staff, and we have done that in the past where we've hired the electrician without their vehicle. This one is a little bit backwards, where we hired the vehicle without the driver, but we do have ample drivers that are trained to run that piece of equipment.
Okay, and then the garbage truck is just because it's got a lower opening. So instead of heaving bags up, we're heaving bags down. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, it's an ergonomic helper, and it also has a bit of compaction on it as well, and a higher capacity, so less runs to the landfill. We can use it for public events as well. Yeah, and the lower load is significantly safer for our operators.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. One of the things that is in here is the transportation system improvement, item number 24. Is that for multiple intersections or just Clark Drive? The description was a little bit confusing to me.
So the chair, that's for multiple locations. It's not for a specific location. Mr. Wickham may have more details on what is planned for next year. If he's
Yes, through the chair. I think actually that description might have been, because this is a multi-year program, that description might have been last year's description. This year we're looking at the roads around Garibaldi Highlands for traffic calming. This is for traffic calming or intersection improvement throughout the district as needed.
So one of the things I noticed just talking about where we allocate our funding is that we get lots and lots of complaints about not enough active transportation, safe routes to school, or traffic traveling too quickly. But I'm not seeing an increase in those budget items over the next little while, but we have this huge paving budget. And I just would like staff to think about, is $100,000 a year for transportation system improvement, so that real pedestrian safety, is that enough? Because we see a lot of demand, and those are the complaints that are driving the emails to us, is speed and safety. So I think seeing that it is at the same amount for the entire 5-year plan is strange to me, and the same with active transportation. So if we're committing to mode shift and our climate change goals, shouldn't the active transportation budget be increasing over time to make sure we're implementing it? So those are sort of philosophical things that I'd like our staff to think about and what we're signaling to the community. We've got this really large paving budget, but the other ones are staying static, and I think we're trying to flip that relationship to make cars secondary to how people and bikes move through our communities. And then on the description for the paving project, it talks about doing a review. Item 23, the district intends to prepare an updated pavement management strategy in 2018 to determine necessary funding levels. So I suspect that state should read something else.
Yeah, through the chair, good catch. That's also an old description carried forward on that annual program. That review was done, and as discussed earlier, the funding levels have been adjusted up to the 1.35 based on that review. So you're right, that is an old description.
All right, so that we don't have another one in the works or sitting somewhere in the 5-year plan. It's not like 2023 or.
I believe that's every 5 years. I'm not sure if that is in the plan. You're right; it should be out at 2023 or 2024.
Okay. And then on the Paradise Valley Bridge abutment replacement, I think that is a place where a lot of our some of our commercial operators put in rafts. And I wonder if, while we have equipment out there, there's an opportunity to work with them to improve water access from an economic development standpoint.
That's a great point. Well, I'll take that to the design team.
Thank you. And then I think that's all my questions. Is there anything else, Council? Councilor Race?
Thank you. It's on the pickleball item. I hadn't realized that was last year's information. My information is that they did not get that grant of $25,000. So the project cost of $50,000, if it's going to go ahead, would be entirely funded by the district. So one way or the other, that should be changed or confirmed. Or if there's a way to refresh the information, I'm not sure what the process is for that, but
I don't think that was the consensus of council. I understood that we were waiting for them to receive a grant. And we
that's right. That was last year, and they did not get it.
But I'm not sure that that changes the direction of council.
Well, and that's a discussion point, I suppose. So are we putting a parking lot together, or are we expected to resolve these today?
No, I think we'll have to have another discussion. Because
Okay.
there's items of clarification, so.
If we can highlight that as a discussion point, then.
Okay. One of the things that I'm wondering whether fits under the COVID Restart grant, and I am going a bit backwards here, is a new software system for council agendas. So right now we use PDF, and there are other more efficient systems that update automatically if you have the electronic version, and so we're not sending out multiple emails if agendas change. Staff presentations can be loaded in as well, and so I wonder if we could put a project in 2021 to investigate new software options for council agendas.
Mayor Elliott, I do believe that this is part of the roadmap for the technology transformation program, but I'll ask Mr. Ng to confirm if that is the case, and if it's not, then we can take that away for consideration.
Through the chair, it is, Mayor Elliott, council software is part of the TTP roadmap. It has not had the prioritization as per se as payroll and procurement and the other modules. We can certainly investigate this year in terms of funding from Restart, as well as resource availability people to investigate and perhaps implement a new council software.
I don't know how other councilors feel, but I hate using PDFs. And I'd rather have something that's in the cloud and just, I can access it from everywhere, and it's not a giant file that has to sit on my computer. It exists, and I use it on other boards, so I didn't see it in your slides, Mr. Ng, and how we work and our efficiency and the work that our legislative services staff have to do to glue together a giant PDF, I can only imagine, is challenging. So I would like to see that sooner rather than later.
Through the chair, understood, and we'll investigate.
Thank you. Anything else, Council? Councilor Stoner and then Councilor Race.
Yeah, just on the items that are 2020 referred to budget, I just wanted to clarify the Smoke Bus Park Committee has a $15,000 amount. It says that there is no project submitted, but that was submitted with a request for consideration of a putting in a composting toilet at the top of Octopus Garden. There's currently a very full outhouse there. So I don't know if staff just missed that as a specific request from the committee, but I wanted to clarify that that was the request that came forward.
Yes, we did consider it, but in our review, that project is not a $15,000 project. It's nowhere near a $15,000 project. It's significantly higher than that and doesn't warrant that sort of expenditure. It can't be done for $15,000. It just can't. It's not a $15,000 project.
I would just ask if staff have actually received a quote for that. We know that there are members on the committee who have recently implemented a project of that sort for less than $15,000. And so they anticipate that with the access costs, it might be slightly higher than what they did recently for just under $14,000. But based on the quotes that they have, that is a manageable expense.
Not in our staff's estimation, and we've been given every indication that Vancouver Coastal Health will not approve those fixtures in that location, again making it a significantly more complex project to undertake. Complexity equals cost. Everything would have to be hand-hauled into that. There's very limited ability to get equipment up there. It's all handwork. Whether or not it could get approved, we don't believe it's doable for anywhere close to $15,000.
this be referred back to the committee?
We could do, yes.
May I?
Yep.
This has been circulated a few times. I think this has come from the committee to council, I think, for the third year in a row. So if this is going to be referred back to the committee, I would request that that comes with an estimate cost from staff's side, so that the committee actually understands what that cost is from our perspective, because that hasn't been seen from them.
Okay. So you move that it's referred back to committee with an estimate of cost from staff? Is there a seconder? Councilor for second. Any opposed? Motion carries. Not seeing any further questions. Oh, sorry, Councilor Anderson.
Yes, if I may, I'd like to come back to the paving budget issue, and just with a general comment. The paving budget relative to the transportation budget, I do appreciate the aspirations that Mayor Elliott has stated, and I respect and I support these aspirations. However, it is also a fact, and it is from my personal experience, that good quality roads also contributed to pedestrian safety. And we do have some road quality issues, road condition issues in our arterial and secondary neighborhood roads, if you like. And they are, because drivers sometimes negotiate these issues in the roads, they do affect pedestrian safety. So we need a holistic picture. We need to be realistic too, that we have a very large commuting public, and we would like to have regional transit for them, but we don't. So we just need to be mindful of that general picture when we consider paving budget relative to active transportation, and that we can't ignore paving budget needs that are related to, in fact, pedestrian safety as well. Thank you.
Councilor Ray.
Thank you. I'm back on the pickleball thing, and it was the comment made about that was council consensus last year, and I'm just trying to recall what we did last year on this particular topic. Did we approve 25 with grant funding 25, or did we just say 0? My recollection was it was 0. I don't think we taxed for $25,000. Could we clarify that?
Councilor Stoner.
My recollection is that we allocated the 25,000 from accumulated surplus last year if it could be matched from grants brought forward by the community.
Oh, so it was not taxed for. Thank you.
Anything further? So there are a number of items that council brought up, and so I imagine with an estimated date of January 28th for public events that we would bring this back prior to that for another discussion.
Yes, that would be our intent.
Is there anything else you needed to cover today since we've been sitting for 3 hours?
Mayor Elliott, I would, since you've been sitting for 3 hours, I'm going to, and since I think we're all aware that we're going to be back here sometime, I'm going to suggest no. Although we did have a desire to try to get council to weigh in on service level changes today also. I'll give you that.
We had done service level change. Didn't we already cover service level change?
We did, and I believe it was left that this is not the final discussion. There will be another opportunity if council wished to weigh in on it. We're hoping that that discussion might take place today, but seeing as you said, we've been at it for quite some time and we will be meeting again, perhaps we'll simply leave the discussion of service level changes until the next appropriate time.
Okay. Thank you. Councilor Pengill.
Yeah, thank you. I did have a couple quick comments. I was trying to restrict myself to questions before, if I can make those.
Go ahead.
So just the one, I noticed that the grant is called the Restart Grant. And when I look sort of 30,000 foot view at our spending, a lot of it seems to be managing COVID. There are a few things like the covered areas in the parks and so on that for me fit under the build back better sort of piece of this, but just sort of high level that build back better, that, you know, really using some of this funding to do things in a completely new and better way. I think there might be a little more opportunity for us in there, and I'm still sort of debating where I sit. You know, I respect some of my councillors' comments about not wanting the money to be taken back and so on, and wanting to leverage it, but just balancing that against, you know, if this does drag on, are we in a good enough position? The parking demand management piece that Councillor Stoner mentioned, I think that's really relevant. We come into so many developments where we are on an ongoing basis actually requiring massive public and private investments into vehicles and parking and so on. And I see this as a really critical way to move away from that. And I think for me, the sooner rather than later we could look at that, the better. The TTP piece, sort of that another increase is a concern, and I just need to spend some time wrapping my head around that. But I do see a lot of value in this, especially during COVID, but that it's another significant increase, which is making me uncomfortable a little bit, and I'll leave it at that. I want to say thank you, though. There's a lot to juggle here.
Any other comments before we close this off? Okay. Thank you very much. We'll look forward to hopefully what will be our final budget discussion before we take it out to the public early in the new year. Okay, so let's take a recess till 1:05. That'll give you 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and finish off the bylaws. Okay, we're back in our special business meeting. Sorry about the delay. Our phone line got disconnected there. So we're now on to the District of Squamish Officer and Delegation Bylaw number 2794, 2020. Is there one presentation, CAO, or is there two for these bylaws?
Sorry, I believe there's just one presentation for these bylaws. Sorry, but the different presenters. So Mr. Buxton, Ms. Boxrud, and then Anthony.
Okay, go ahead. Is it Mr. Buxton? Are you starting?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. I'll just start my presentation here. Where are we? There we go. Oh. Okay, so now how do I, oh, there we go. Let me just, okay, so thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you very much, Mayor and Council. I have two bylaws today that will do a brief presentation on: the Officer and Delegation Bylaw 2794 and an amendment to the Land Development Procedures Bylaw. I should just note that this has been, getting these bylaws to this point has been a team effort. Corporate Services, Robin and Nav have both contributed to this. Anthony and Heather in the Finance Department, as you'll hear from later on in the presentation, and Chris Wickham and Jonas Valniskis have also been involved with this effort. What is this? Okay, I just need to get this to advance.
You need your Santa powers, Mr. Buxton.
Yes, apparently they're not very good. Of course, this is the manager and the IT not working. Tori, is there a way that the slides advance when I'm in the presentation mode?
She's doing something, Mr. Buxton. Hold on.
Hi, Gary. Did you try to share it as a file or as your screen?
I have no idea.
Okay, so if you want to stop sharing.
Okay. So, hang on. Oh,
Oh, there you go. Got it.
wow, that was entirely unintentional. Okay, I now see how I can advance the slide. So our objectives today was in putting these.
The slides look a little bit weird.
We all good?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
So the effort today was to increase staff effectiveness, improve process effectiveness, and help to reduce council's agendas and workload. So this quote was our present for you just before Christmas. So the recommendation that we'll get to later is that we approve first, second, and third reading of the Officer and Delegation Bylaw, and similarly on the Land Development Procedures Bylaw. In doing that, we will repeal the the existing Officer and Development Bylaw 2661 and the Purchasing Authority Bylaw 1721, which will be repealed. And that closes the loop on the changes that we're making here and which came forward to Council in November with the procurement policy. So this really is part of a three-part piece of action. It started with the procurement policy in November. Today we have the two bylaws before you, and in February we'll be bringing forward some fees and charges that will provide some final delegation around fees for affordable housing and similar items like that. So in terms of the content changes to the Officer and Delegation Bylaw, the purchasing amounts that are allowed by the respective directors are shown in Schedule A. I think they've all been increased. The most significant, of course, is the Chief Administrative Officer's amount, which is now unlimited authorization to the extent approved by Council in the budget. So those are all listed now in Schedule A of the bylaw. In terms of these are some examples of some of the procurement that currently appears before Council in terms of tender or RFP awards that we've done over the last 6 months. So they are significant, but again, the tender process has its own sort of statutory requirements. And to be honest, Council's involvement in awarding them probably isn't an example of best practice in procurement. But these are the sorts of things that now would be delegated to the CAO and to staff to approve. In terms of Officer and Delegation, again, changes in the real estate leases, operating agreements, licenses. The essential change here is that the amount that the CAO can approve has been increased up to 200,000. There's a small table at the bottom indicating, we have about 99 of agreements under licenses, leases, and operating agreements. The vast majority of them are covered under the current delegation bylaw, so nothing will change. 11 will not be covered, and there's probably just about another half a dozen that may be affected by the changes proposed here. Examples being the forestry forestry building leases, RCMP building lease, Adventure Center. I say these don't occur on an annual basis, so they aren't frequent occurrences that the council would see a lot of anyway. In terms of reporting and accountability, I'll quickly cover this here, and then Heather and Anthony will step in. So in terms of the procurement policy, the responsibility to follow that policy is clearly outlined in the procurement policy to the CAO, the CFO, general managers, and then directors. It's clearly identified their responsibilities to follow that process. There's a continuous internal audit process that's been established and evolving, where the procurement is being centralized and automated, and there's 2 eyes on every procurement process now. That has changed, and I say some of the reporting under the quarterly variance reporting. There's a quick example. this is the sort of material that we'll be developing to bring forward information and transparency on what has been approved through the delegated procurement process. So Heather and Anthony, I don't know if you wanted to fill in some more detail on that.
Yeah, in terms of addressing financial controls, so that has been a concern in the past. So control environment best practices for boards or councils is to demonstrate independence from management, provide oversight through the establishment and adoption of the control framework or policy, establish the appropriate authorities and responsibilities in pursuit of the financial plan, and to hold those individuals accountable for their internal control responsibilities through results reporting, as Gary mentioned, such as quarterly reporting and the year-end financials. So bringing tender awards to council is not considered a financial control of the purchasing policy in that it does not prevent or safeguard the organization from overspending. Rather, it can create a false sense of security that it does prevent overspending. So staff's role is to ensure a robust purchase order and change order process is in place, which will prevent intentional or unintentional circumvention of the policy. The current purchase order and change order process is being automated within newly implemented financial system. So a big win there, with continuous oversight from both the finance and the procurement functions. So therefore, within control environment best practices, council's responsibility is the approval of the budget, as Gary mentioned, reviewing the reporting of the results and holding those with the delegated authority accountable to those results. I'll hand it over to Anthony for adding any more on procurement.
Mute. I've got to remember to unmute myself. I'd just add that coming back to the trade treaties, we're required to do this reporting and post this information publicly anyway. So we're kind of just building on what we actually would have to report out publicly under those trade treaties. We're also going to capture a lot more of our spend through the procurement module, which we've just put in place and building upon. So we're going to have a lot more oversight and insight into what's actually going on in the procurement field, and we're quite comfortable with where we're going with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather and Anthony. So continuing on in terms of the land development procedures bylaw, the principal changes here are to increase the areas allowed under temporary use permits from 185 to 300 square meters. There are a number of form and character development permit areas for DP areas 3 through 13. So residential mixed-use developments where there are less than 20 units and 300 square meters of non-residential space. Non-residential development permits where, again, we're below that 300-meter threshold, and non-residential development permits within the business park. So in terms of land development procedures, those remain in place. So public information meetings, public notification where it's required, circulation, referral to ADP, all of those processes remain in place with respect to the permits, whether they're delegated or not. Any permits that have variances in them, of course, are not delegated. So those are going to stay with council. And then any of the decisions made under the delegated permits are subsequently appealable to council should the applicant wish to do so. In terms of some examples, in terms of the TUPs at present, it probably appears that there'll be minimal impact. We've had 14 applications through 18 and 19, all were below the current threshold, so would be unaffected by the change. To be honest, we've seen one TUP in the last few years that would sort of that wasn't delegated, but it wouldn't be delegated under the current proposed 300-meter threshold. It was way larger than that. So there's probably not a large number of applications that we're going to see there. In terms of examples for the types of permits that we've seen in the last year or so that would be subsequently delegated, there was a triplex at Hope Road, University Heights townhouse development. In terms of the non-residential development permits, we couldn't find any examples of that recently. And then there are a number of Cedar Sky Business Park development permits that have been approved in the last year or so. But these are the sorts of applications that would then be delegated down to staff. In terms of implications, in terms of reporting and accountability, certainly it's going to be possible for us to do biannual reporting of any delegated development permit and temporary use permit decisions. That'll be made all the easier under the new development management system. So in the similar vein that council sees the quarterly, sees that spreadsheet of development permits, it's going to be very easy for us to create and provide that report to council on a biannual basis. In terms of implications, I'm sure that there are some out there that would see something nefarious and see something like this. Some of the staff members are taking a rather humorous approach to it, but to be honest, it's probably more vanilla ice cream than ice cream sundae. I don't think the public's going to see a significant change in terms of what they see in terms of how the district operates. It'll be mostly an internal implication. But all of these processes take a significant amount of time to work their way through the agenda process and have staff reports developed and presentations developed. And then it's time at council on council's agendas. I mean, we anticipate there's probably between 8 to 10 applications annually that will be subsequently delegated. Probably in the area of 12 to 15 procurement-related items that would now not appear on council's agenda. And using the times that we've seen for these items on recent council agendas, that's, it's 3 business meetings, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that could be almost 1 month's worth of council work for perhaps a February. So the recommendation is that council approve, say, the first, second, and third readings for both of the bylaws that are in front of them. And we will attempt to answer council's questions.
Thank you for the holiday themed slides, as well as the very creative themed slides.
Welcome.
It's a highlight for our last meeting of the year. Councillor Herford.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Buxton. I had some questions going in around the reporting. I think those were all addressed. And I appreciate the slide where you highlighted the decisions that were made recently that would now be delegated. And I couldn't, in that quick glance, I couldn't see, they didn't all come to my memory. So were there any in there where any substantive changes were made for any reason? I mean, really with these DPs, if they meet the guidelines, they go. So we're not missing, I just want to make sure we're not missing any opportunity to for the betterment of a project or anything. And so those examples were all just straightforward. And obviously the variances would kick it over. I'm just trying to think of any other reason that we'd want to see these, although I'm happy to see them go on to off our agenda.
Through the chair, yes. When the development permits that comply and there are no variances, they do tend to slip through with relatively few, if any, changes made. That's unlike the development permits where we've got variances when we can see substantive changes, but those are going to come back to council. So no, I don't think there have been any straight development permits where we've seen council and the decision resulting in substantive changes or noticeable changes to the application.
Okay, thank you.
Hill, Stoner, Anderson, French.
Thank you. And in general, I really appreciate this approach and like the idea. I think that the one piece that I'm a little bit hesitant about still is the accountability, not around the dollars, but alignment with policy and some of that. And I think with the new procurement policy, I'm quite comfortable with the officer and delegation bylaw piece. A bit curious to see how that reporting falls out, but that seems very strong to my mind in terms of outlining the expectations in terms of alignment with our strategic plan goals and that sort of thing. On the land development procedures piece, that's where I'm a little bit less certain, it seems, and I realize sometimes it's with variances and not just DPs, but we get into, it feels like to me, a fair bit of discussion sometimes around DPA guidelines and non-compliance. And, you know, that's maybe a good argument too, to get these delegated and not have those long discussions at council. But in terms of, you know, understanding what is our threshold for, you know, will we have a higher threshold because these aren't going to council? You are expected to hit every guideline to get your DP, or what level of variance is tolerable, and how will we know not just sort of dollar value, what projects have been approved, but how much variance we're giving, or discretion or allowance we're giving for not meeting those guidelines. Can you speak to the policy or constraints around that?
Sure, through the chair. Now, in terms of the level of compliance, I mean, the issue here is we're talking about guidelines, not standards or requirements. And we certainly can't expect that all guidelines are met all the time, because then they're not guidelines. Those are requirements or regulations. And the legislation is clear that with development permits, they need to be guidelines. So I don't know that we can establish a minimal level of minimum standard for compliance with guidelines. They're not like regulations. They are by definition somewhat discretionary in how they work, and not all guidelines apply in all situations. So I don't know that you're going to be able to establish objectively that there's a certain level of compliance with the guidelines. I think we have to approach this with an appreciation that we have common purpose and understanding about what we need to do, the objectives, and what needs to get accomplished. I think in terms of how we monitor this over time is there are really, I think, two ways. One of which is at the point that they're implemented, whether it's council, staff, or the ADP, we need to be looking at, are these working? Are these creating instances or creating contradictions or conflicts that don't work? The other is at the time that the project is complete, is are they achieving the outcome? And you look at both. Are they, during the process, are they creating issues? Are you seeing problems? And then is the output what you expect? But what you don't want to do is start to do that work in the middle of reviewing a development permit, because that's administering guidelines, not creating guidelines. So you need to sort of look at, are they working when I'm using them, whether it's council, ADP, or staff, and we all feed that back into a review process. And then we look at the finished product and we feed that back into a review process. But the actual point at which you're reviewing the development permit is not the appropriate time to be figuring out whether or not the guidelines are right or wrong or achieving it. Is at that point in time, they're the guidelines and you administer them, and they either meet the guidelines or they don't. So.
Okay, if I could just follow up, and I appreciate that that explanation. I guess I'm assuming though, and I understand these are guidelines, but there's some point if someone met none of the guidelines, we would just say you're not ready for a permit yet, you need to do better. And I'm wondering if there's a higher threshold where you say, well, actually this one, it's sort of on a fence, and council needs to make the final call of whether they've sufficiently met the guidelines or not. And I'm wondering, it sort of sounds like council just is, well, I mean, the proposal is that council, I think, gives full discretion to staff for that determination. And just the reason I'm digging into this is we have seemed as a council to have a lot of discussion about some of the guidelines and whether or not it's close enough to grant the permit. And maybe I'm misinterpreting what some of our discussions have been about. And I guess that's just the piece I'm trying to understand. Is there a threshold piece where you say, well, no, this piece still needs to come back to council, or this is clearly, you know, it's met everything except one, and that's good enough, and we don't need to go to council, and there's some sort of guidance in terms of what that threshold might be?
No, you can't establish that. you either delegate and empower staff to apply the guidelines at their discretion, or you don't. You can't delegate it except in instances. It just doesn't work that way. You delegate or you don't. And I think we have, I don't know that we've had fundamental disagreements about development permits where there aren't variances, about whether or not there's compliance with the fundamentals of the development permit area guidelines. I mean, we're all on the same page here. We have the same objectives. We understand council's objectives in administering these guidelines.
I just don't want to get too far off track. So we have the DPRA guidelines and they're in the OCP. And so I think it's council's role to make sure that those guidelines are working, but we can't do that at each individual DP decision. If we want to review the guidelines, that should be a body of work. And what we're delegating is for our staff to be able to interpret those guidelines and make a decision. And where there's variances, official variances, those DPs with variances, that would come to council. But if your problem is with the DPRA guidelines, that's the body of work we need to work on, not the delegation.
Yeah, no, and I guess just trying to start this in my head. I think the case where staff has sort of reviewed the guidelines, acknowledge they haven't met some of them, but figure it's sufficient to still move forward. And I'm just wondering if there's a line where, they haven't met 3 of them, but the DP is still okay to go ahead because these are only guidelines, versus if you hadn't met 20 of them, you wouldn't get to go ahead. And so there's some point, some threshold in there, and it sounds like no, where this would come to council. And as we delegate these, is there an expectation of a greater proportion of guidelines are met before getting a DP, or are we not setting that expectation? It sounds like we're not setting any such expectation.
No, I don't think you can, because then you're treating them as regulations or standards, not as guidelines.
But I guess if someone had hit none of the guidelines,
then we wouldn't approve it. I mean, staff are able to exercise that discretion and not approve it, or instruct the applicant to go back around and do it again, which we do with almost every file that we have. There is a long series of negotiations to get the applications that council invariably sees are not quite the ones that we see when the application drops on our desks. They get lots of feedback about how to improve them. That will continue.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, on the officer and delegation bylaw, appreciate the feedback on how we will receive quarterly reports on the specific contracts awarded. The second portion in the staff report for the officer and delegation bylaw speaks to increasing the threshold from 20,000 to 200,000 for licenses, agreements, sub-licenses, as well as the purchasing and sale of property for easements and rights of way and things like that. And I'm just curious what the reporting mechanism will be for that, and where and how those dollars are allocated in the budgets.
In terms of, and I'll let Ms. Glende weigh in on this as the person that will be exercising that discretion, but I mean, we typically have not reported on lease license and operating agreement executions to council in the past. Wouldn't do that going forward unless requested. I mean, a lot of them are very minor, and it might be a sidewalk cafe permit or something of that nature. And in terms of the 6 or 7 that are eligible for CA or approval now, I don't know. I think the frequency is such that I don't know that there would be much to report, to be honest, on a regular basis, because they don't occur with any frequency. So I'm not. We kicked this around and thought that there may actually in terms of the additional delegation, not be really anything new to report except an episodic approval here and there across 3 or 4 years. So.
Okay, then what about the portion on the, it says the same thresholds are being introduced for land title documents and releases, such as the purchase and sale agreements of easements, rights of way, which relate to securing property for existing or proposed district infrastructure, public works, or to facilitate third-party use of district property, where the consideration paid or received by the district is less than $200,000. What is our reporting mechanism on that component?
Again, right now, I don't know that we do because it's sufficiently infrequent. We'd have a reporting setup that 9 times out of 10 probably doesn't report anything. These are not frequent occurrences of activity.
And so if there was, that money would typically be allocated in an existing budget though, if we needed to secure an easement, for example, that would come out of which budget?
Oh, I would have to defer to, I don't know if Nav is on the call, whether she would know where that money is typically assigned.
Hi, Gary. I can in on that. Through the chair, so if the district were to obtain an easement or whatnot, then that would generally come out of the engineering budget for the project. And then things like awnings where developers, that we get a processing fee, that revenue goes into a real estate budget. So hopefully that clarifies things.
Okay, thank you. And then on the land development procedures bylaw amendments, with regards to temporary use permits, is there an existing policy? So temporary use permits are basically a short-term rezoning. Are there any existing policies or directives that would guide where we would allow, what we would allow in given areas, or is it just at full discretion of whoever's reviewing the application?
Now, I wish Jonas were on the call, but I think there is some direction provided in the OCP. I don't believe it's extensive, but there is some minimal direction policy contained in the OCP.
That's it for now. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Over the years, as I reflect on these information packages, even prior to when I became on council, I did quite often find information in, for example, RFPs or contract awards that prompted me to ask questions of staff or of council. And these were on things like engagement strategy proposed or terms of reference for a project. In fact, I've been asking these types of questions with respect to budget items this year. So what I would like to suggest here is I would be interested, I think council will be interested to have certain available information about projects, and generally we find them in the district news. That's where the tenders are put out, and some of those are important information, and I just would want to be clear that that information would be available ongoing, in particular for contract awards or consultant projects. But I have a question. That's just kind of an observation. Now, you mentioned in the report, or the report mentions development permits in the business park. And the business park is something that we're giving close scrutiny to at this period of time, and we probably will ongoing. We have also, you've also mentioned in your list, Mr. Buxton, the DP 528 in Brackendale, the Hope Road triplex. And that was, a background of that was a bylaw change that allowed triplexes on corner lots. And we can see it as part of a larger ongoing policy program towards greater density in more neighborhoods. But that is under evolution. And that project at Hope Road, or that proposal, was not uncontroversial. Council did not have consensus about it, and neither did the advisory design panel. It went through quite a rigorous discussion there. And so my question is it possible that staff can exercise some discretion and judgment when we see, for example, business park development permit applications or development permit applications that reflect new policy that's under evolution, that has some uncertainties, that we can, what would you say about the possibility ongoing for staff to exercise some discretion and judgment as to what it brings before council?
Are you, if I'm interpreting, you're saying if it might be potentially contentious that it gets referred to council?
Not only that, Mr. Buxton, but whether it is a type of project that is new or represents a first instance. In the case of Hope Road, it was, I believe that was the first triplex on a corner lot that was applied for. And so where we're at in implementing new policy, for example.
No, that's not possible. You either delegate or you don't. It's not delegate until it gets uncomfortable. From staff's point of view, no, that's not possible. It is either delegated or not.
So you don't see an opportunity in your interpretation for discretion on the part of staff to bring an X or Y project or development application to council?
No, because then it's not delegated.
This is an all or nothing bylaw, and that's why there's always the recourse for people to have it reviewed by council at the end of the process. But we cannot cherry pick what is delegated and what's not once this bylaw is passed. So this is our opportunity to make those decisions, Councillor Anderson, and then staff do not have discretion, and neither do we. We can't pull something out that's been delegated.
Thank you. I'll just then end with, I think that those particular projects, some in the business park and the one on Hope Road, are significant. And I'm just reflecting on that, but I accept your explanation. Thank you.
Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. I am interested in exploring a little bit about impacts on the issuing of building permits. In reading through the report, I was expecting I might see some mention of that type of impact, and I didn't see it there. So I want to ask how this move will contribute to decreasing building permit wait times, if in fact that's a potential outcome.
Through the chair, I don't know that this has any direct impact on building permit wait times. It will have an impact for the delegated permits in terms of process time from start to finish. So if you have to go through let's say a rezoning, a development permit, a building permit, or just a development permit and a building permit, it will shorten that cycle time by probably no less than 4 to 6 weeks, because by the time we get council reports together and we can schedule stuff on agendas, and then we're getting reports ready 2 weeks ahead of agendas. It's probably a minimum 4, probably 6 week chunk of time out of the cycle that is out, that can then shorten the aggregate development permit and building permit time together. But I don't know that it'll have a direct change on building permits, other than the time saved can then go to whatever planning review of a building permit needs to get done. So there may be a small saving, but it's mostly in the aggregate cycle time on an application that will be saved here.
Okay, very good. And I was going to ask if the 3 meetings you were going to be saving us could result in us taking the month of December off, but I think I know the answer, so thank you.
Nice try, Councillor French.
Direct to the chair. Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, I see your hand, Councillor Pango, but I'm going to ask my questions first. One of the things I'm wondering about is that can we, in our procurement reporting, you showed a graph there, Mr. Buxton, which had sort of the name of the project, a description of the project, the amount, and who won it. And I'm wondering if we can also include how many bids were received through the RFP process, and the number of contracts that have been awarded to each proponent in any given year. And I think one of the things that the community always wants council to be aware of is there a competitive bidding process? So are we getting more than one bid? And are we making sure that people aren't being awarded contracts over and over and over again? And in some instances, I know we want to see that because they've been part of earlier projects, but there's also that distrust in government that someone's rewarding a friend. So is that easy to add to the reporting and procurement? Is how many bids we're receiving per project? And
I think I'll ask Mr. Jeffries to respond to that.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. To answer your question, we were actually kicking that around yesterday. There were 2 columns we were going to add to the reporting. They're pretty basic key performance indicators around procurement, is how many bids you're seeing on a project and who's getting what projects and how many. We do cover some of that through the SOCI reporting, right? Everybody who's getting more than $25,000 a year from the district appears on that report, and it doesn't break it down into that level of detail, and that's kind of the level of detail we want to actually break it down into. So that's definitely, we were kicking that around yesterday, and that's something we want to add to that reporting.
Okay. And then with the financial delegation and signing contracts, and the CAO has authority over $200,000 as long as it's in the budget. But what if, like I was trying to think of sort of worst case scenarios that would pit a council against a delegated authority. And so let's say there's $500,000 in the plan to purchase electric vehicles for the fleet, new vehicles. But those electric vehicles weren't available, and so staff decided, well, close enough, we'll do hybrid plug-ins, even though council had approved electric vehicles. So if it's in the budget, but it's a change in direction, technically the CAO has the authority to approve that, I think. And I was just wondering sort of where this changes direction, where is the language that brings it back to council?
Yeah, so I'll start with this, and I'm sure Ms. Glende and Mr. Jeffries will want to weigh in, but the 2 things there, one of which is a financial component, one of which is what we call project scope. And as far as we're concerned, we have no ability to change project scope without council approval. So if council has approved EVs, we can't go out and buy, let's go out and buy hydrogen vehicles. Of course, we think that's a super cool idea. We would need to come back to council and amend the scope of the project, because the budget contains both a financial amount and a scope. So we must comply with both of those to effect the financial portion of that. So,
is that clearly laid out in the language of this delegated authority?
I'd actually go back, Mayor Elliott, to the procurement policy. That's where it's laid out what council's role is in the procurement process. So whatever's approved in the project, getting back to Gary's point, is around scope and a financial component. So as long as it's clear in the budget that you've approved buying certain vehicles, and then there's a financial component to that, we don't really have any room to pivot. We'd have to bring something like that that's not within the budget back to council to get sign off through the budgeting process. And I'm sure Heather's got something to add to that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, in terms of scope, it's also laid out in the community charter. So it's not even a council authority. So it's not even a council authority to delegate as well. So if a scope changes, we do have to go through the budget amendment process.
Okay, and then a lot of the questions from council today have been about reporting and transparency. And so is it appropriate to capture that in this bylaw? How we'll report out on this bylaw, or where would we capture that? Because councils change and staff change, but the community deserves the same level of transparency and accountability. And so if we don't capture it in the bylaw, where do we capture it?
I would suggest through the chair that there's probably a policy, a reporting policy that parallels the bylaw. It's not typical to put procedures into a bylaw form. So it would probably be a reporting policy that would be best developed parallel to the bylaw.
Okay, I certainly think that would be helpful. You know, it's not uncommon for entire councils to turn over. And I think it's really important for that consistency that we're really clear about how we are holding council and staff accountable to the public for how we're procuring and making changes and signing off on agreements. So I think it just increases the transparency of when council delegates that we update some sort of reporting policy in the district. And it would be nice to see that come back as we change the fees and charges bylaw. Any other questions, Council? Oh yeah, Council Pengo, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Just based on a comment from one of my fellow colleagues, if someone, something to the effect was said that if someone doesn't like one of these delegated decisions, they have the right to appeal to council. But if I understand correctly, only the proponent themselves would have standing. So a neighbor that didn't like their other neighbor's permit wouldn't have standing, or someone 3 houses away, it would strictly be the proponent. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's my understanding as well. The applicant can appeal a decision, because with a development permit, there's typically no public involvement. So no, I think I would agree with Councillor Pettingill.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Buckton, you said that none of the sort of process changes around notification and public information meetings. But what should change is very clearly stating right at the beginning, this is a delegated DP, should it not? Because if you take Councillor Anderson's example of the Hope Road, we got a lot of correspondence about that. And so what does change is our communication around anything that has to be published in the newspaper or is put up on the development showcase actually has to very clearly say this is a delegated DP or a lease agreement, whatever, and here's the person to contact if you have questions.
Yes, we will make those changes in our outgoing communication.
Okay. I don't see any more hands. Staff have asked for first 3 readings of both of these bylaws. And if council feels that they're ready, then we can proceed in that manner. And your alternative is to do less than 3 readings if you feel there's changes that need to be made. Councilor French.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
For the first one, bylaw number 2794/2020.
Yes.
Is there a seconder? And that is the officer and delegation bylaw. Councilor Stoner, was that your hand? Any comments? Councilor Stoner and then Pettingill.
Yeah, I'm happy to support first 3 readings of this bylaw. I think it will help increase process and efficiency. And I do feel comfortable with the level of reporting that has been described by staff in their presentation. I would like to see the policy that Mayor Elliott spoke to in terms of reporting on this to come back in time for adoption, if that's possible, so that we just know clearly what that reporting structure is going to be when we adopt this bylaw. Thank you.
Councilor Pettingill and then Councilor Hertford.
Yeah, thank you. Echo Councillor Stoner's comments and say I am really happy to see this delegation. I think it really makes a lot of sense from a governance perspective, and the new procurement policy gives me a lot of comfort in terms of the accountability and those mechanisms on making sure this is done well. So I am quite comfortable with this bylaw.
Thank you, Councilor Hertford.
Thank you. I was happy to see this come forward and sort of the continued work on efficiencies in general. And I would like to echo my colleagues' ideas around the reporting piece. I think that's very important going forward, and hopefully this is available by time of adoption and just as an extra level of transparency and a safeguard for the public as we go forward with the policy. I'm happy to support 3 readings this time.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Anderson?
Yes, I will be supporting this package as proposed. We do have I think, a good, robust procurement policy in place. Otherwise, I'd be very nervous. Maybe we'll come back and revisit and fine tune that in future, but I think that what we have in place is pretty solid. I'm also would look forward to spending more time on policy and from whether it's marine action strategy, arts and culture, housing, or DPA guidelines. And I hope we can follow through with this, the opportunity that this package should at least contribute towards. I would also like to echo the previous speakers regarding changes in outgoing communication. I think these need to be very carefully looked at. Council is interested also in trends, but our community members are also interested in information as well, that we must respect this. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Now for District of Squamish Land Development Procedures Bylaw, this is Amendment Bylaw number 2795. Councillor Herford, you're moving first 3 readings?
I am, yes.
Seconder? Councillor Stoner seconds. Anybody wish to make any comments? Councillor Pettengill, or sorry, Councillor Herford, Councillor Pettengill, Councillor Ray.
Thank you. Comments very similar to the bylaw that we just dealt with. I'm happy to see these efficiencies coming forward, and it makes just makes so much sense. I would like to see some mechanism, reporting mechanism, robust reporting mechanism before adoption. But I'm happy to move these at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, thank you. I think I will support 3rd reading. I'm a bit more hesitant on this one than the last one. I, again, really support what we're trying to achieve here. I'm just given some of the discussions we've had in the Hope Road as an example, it feels like there's some sort of gap here, and I understand we shouldn't be using this process to rewrite policy, but whether it's our understanding of policy or how we report back on it, that piece is a little bit fuzzy to me. And so maybe the understanding, the reporting that will come back on this will be sufficient and give us a mechanism then separately to work on policy where that's required. So, you know, we'll see where we go at adoption. And I think some sort of, at the very least, reporting, more robust reporting policy or framework around this will be important for final support. Thank you.
Councillor Ray.
Thank you. And I'll support this, but it is a trickier delegation, I think, than the first one, in the sense that when you're talking about development permits, one of the aspects of it is form and character, and there's some subjectivity to that. It takes me back to the one we had recently with the Brackendale General Store, which I recognize was a little larger than what we're talking about here. But had it been a little bit smaller and this bylaw in place, I'm not sure if we'd ever be satisfied with the outcome. Some of the objections of some of the councillors, myself included, were on the form and character. We didn't like the look of it and so forth. So notwithstanding the staff recommendation in that file. So I think it will be something that we'll have to be careful of. I think it's probably places a little bit more onus on staff to make sure they're kind of aligned with where council goes from council to council, really, and what they find attractive and not. But you know, I'm prepared to take the step. I recognize the efficiencies, and so I'm prepared to support this.
Thank you. Any other comments? I agree with my colleagues. This is the trickier one, and I think that we've chosen sort of the right size to start with, and scope. So it's not anywhere in the community. It is, well, especially for the larger ones in the business park. I think that we'll see a similar form and character what we've seen before. I think, though, this one, to me, does require really clear communication at the beginning, a reporting mechanism that allows us to see what has potentially been controversial and what hasn't, and certainly annual reporting about how many were approved and delegated through staff. But I think it's important to look for efficiencies as we grow, and I think, if anything, if we're not trusting our DCRA guidelines, that's the work that we need to do, rather than avoid increasing our delegation. So I will support this. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Get you to put yourself on mute, Mr. Buxton. Next up, under item 6, is changing the regular business meetings in January to special business meetings to accommodate our electronic format. Let's move by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. We now have a reconsideration, so I'm going to get staff to explain why this is. I brought it back for reconsideration because there was a procedural error last week in rejecting the recommendation from Committee of the Whole. So is Mr. Buxton going to speak to this? I want Council to be really clear on what we're voting for. There's also been some confusion because of flyers that were sent out into the community. And so today we are not voting on this application. We're voting on a procedural step. So I will turn it over to staff to make sure this is clear and we get it right this time.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Elliott. Yes, as Mayor Elliott noted, we're not voting for or against the bylaw. The bylaw itself, that being 2735, is not on the table today. Unfortunately, what we were trying to do is determine how the bylaw would be presented to council, not the bylaw itself. Would it be on the basis of work done to date, or on the basis of the comprehensive review, application review process that was discussed in the report to council? So it's only on the basis of how this will appear in front of council subsequently next year. So I believe we've provided an amended motion that, so the first one, that council directs staff to bring forward the official community plan amendment bylaw 2735 for council's consideration. There's an addition, and it says based on the review conducted to date by planning staff. So as is, whereas the subsequent one directs staff to direct staff to develop a comprehensive application review process. So that is the motion, and I believe council at the initial meeting, rather than last week, had approved the former. So motion which was based on the review conducted to date. So it would come back to council with a staff report based on the review conducted to date by planning staff. Now, I'm hoping that has made things clearer for council and not made it worse.
Councillor Pettit.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Buxton, through the chair, I believe you mentioned the first option on our agenda implies a comprehensive review. I don't see that language. The second one is just for the information review done to date.
At Committee of the Whole, the majority of council directed staff to bring back for council's consideration the bylaw based on the review conducted to date.
Okay.
So that's the only motion that is in front of us, but staff have added that wording that it's more clear that the bylaw will come back based on the review conducted to date. The more comprehensive one is not back to reconsideration because that is not what committee of the whole recommended.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that helps.
Sense?
Yes.
So it's a clarified version of what committee of the whole recommended. Is everyone clear? It's really important that you are. Councillor, yeah, I anticipate your hand. Go ahead. Yeah.
So how was this voted on at committee of the whole? What was the vote?
It was, what do you mean what was the vote? The majority of council voted for the motion that says that council directs staff to bring forward the District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw number 2500-2017 Amendment Bylaw for DL 509510, number 2735-2020 for council's consideration. That was the recommendation from committee of the whole. What staff are saying is that to make it clear to the public and to ourselves that we add based on the review conducted to date by planning staff. So there's not going to be a comprehensive review. The committee of the whole recommended bringing it forward based on the work conducted to date. Okay. So, Councillor Pettengill?
I was going to move the amended recommendation from staff.
Okay, I'm just going to check. Councillor Harper, did you have a question or were you moving it?
I did have a quick question just to be quadruply sure which where we're going here. So with the recommendation from the committee of the whole, I was in opposition to that. If I vote to, as I wanted, a more comprehensive review process. However, there's no, seeing as last week we voted this option down, which I believe was a procedural gaffe. There's not for or against this. It's just really approving that or reaffirming that our vote was in the direction that it was at this point in the process, and with anything coming from committee of the whole, regardless of support voting for or against the motion. When the majority of committee of the whole voted a certain way, we're just confirming that's what happened. It's not necessarily a change in position by supporting the recommendation from committee of the whole. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yes. We are confirming a motion of committee of the whole, but I would also say that if you felt strongly about the need to do a comprehensive review, you may not wish to support this.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Pettengill has moved the amended motion for reconsideration, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Are there any comments? Councillor French.
Thank you. And just for consistency, I won't be supporting this motion. I felt all along that it was the time to take a comprehensive look at this particular property. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Herford.
And thank you. After my clarifying preamble, I will also, for consistency, I won't be supporting this motion. I feel a comprehensive review was the way forward, so we could truly understand the scope of what's proposed and what it would take. So I won't be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I'll be changing my vote. I voted last time to support this resolution, but I'll be changing it to vote against. I am in favor of the comprehensive review. I'm in favor of progress. That's why I'm kind of on the fence here, but I'm definitely in favor of the comprehensive review, and so I'll be voting against this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any further hands. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Councillors French, Herford, Anderson opposed. Motion carries. So this will come back to us for first reading based on the current work done to date sometime in the new year. Okay, Well, we're only like an hour behind. A motion to close for legal and land. Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. So you haven't sent a Blue Jeans link, and we'll just take 5 minutes to